This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the Transport Committee. So may I welcome members, officers and the public to today's meeting of the Transport Committee. The main item for discussion today is the second part of our investigation on outer London transport. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched off or on silent mode, and if you can, even unselect the vibration, because that can affect our little machines here. If you want to bring your microphone forward a bit, please use the base. Don't grab the neck, as that can damage the item. Okay, so can I ask by asking our clerk, Paul Goodcharge, if he has any apologies have been received, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We've had apologies from Assembly members Moema and McCartney, and Assembly members Sheikh and Clark are attending today as substitutes, and Assembly member Berry is running a bit late, but she'll be here shortly.
Fantastic. Good. So, can we note the recommendations set out in item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? Councillor Rogers.
Councillor Rogers?
Oh, sorry. Assembly member Rogers.
Just
Wrong
rails,
building.
rails on the agenda later, so just thought it prudent just to restate my interest with Network Rail.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Can we note the chairing arrangements as agreed by the London Assembly on the 20th of July 2023? Basically puts me in the chair. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 15th of June and 13th of July 2023 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the Transport Committee and additional correspondence received?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we note the actions by the chairman of the committee under delegated authority in consultation with the deputy chair and group party lead members, namely to agree a letter to the chief executive of London Travel Watch regarding the consultation on ticket office closures as attached in Appendix 1, and note the response received from the managing director of Southeastern attached at Appendix 2.
Agreed.
Thank you. Right. Now we move on to the main item of business, which is a question and answer session on the Outer London Transport. The session today will be divided into 2 panels. I would like to welcome our guests of the first panels, Geoff Hobbs, who is Director of Public Transport Services Planning TfL. Welcome, Geoff. Councillor Deirdre Costigan, Acting Chair, Transport and Environment Committee, London Councils. Welcome. And Councillor Nicholas Bennett, JP, Executive Member for Transport, Highways and Road Safety, London Borough Bromley. Welcome. So, thank you very much to our guests, and so here we go. So we will start, I will start off the bidding. So the first question is to my colleagues on the councils, and that is, how does public transport connectivity vary across different outer London boroughs, including connections outside London? How do your boroughs compare to counterparts in terms of transport provision? Ladies first, I think.
Thanks very much, Chair. Obviously, I'm speaking on behalf of London Council's Transport Environment Committee, so it's kind of more of an overview, I guess, of Outer London would be my perspective. But I also am Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Ealing, at Ealing Council, so I do, my examples will be more local to my experience. But certainly, across Outer London boroughs, I wouldn't say there's a consistent story in terms of the level of access, because it is different both within boroughs and between boroughs. But generally, I think across all of the Outer London boroughs, there is less connectivity compared to inner London boroughs, and that is the common denominator. But if you look at a borough like Ealing, for example, in the Acton area, towards the east of the borough, where you're going more towards central London, there is much higher levels of connectivity. It's easier to get a bus, to get a tube, to get the New Elizabeth line, if you were in that area. But as you move westwards and northwards in the borough, there is far less connectivity within a borough like Ealing, and we see similar in other boroughs. In West London, say Brent, that's again got inner London characteristics in some areas, but very much outer London when it comes to transport in other areas. So it's quite variable, but across the board, I think there is a need for a more strategic approach to connect up areas, and also, of course, the funding that's vitally needed to go along with that. So that would be, our combined call at London Councils as a cross-party organisation representing inner and outer London boroughs, is to increase that connectivity both between outer London boroughs, within outer London boroughs, and from outer to inner. There is, we have got some big gaps I think, in terms of connectivity, whether it's buses, rail, or tube. We have got big gaps where people still can't get to a bus, for example, in Ealing, to one of our 7 towns. We have places in the borough where you can't get to one of our 7 towns on just one bus. And that is an issue. So they're the kind of experiences we have across outer London. Councillor Bennett might be able to say a little bit more about connections outside of London than myself.
Oh, thank you very much for that. That's very useful. Councillor Bennett.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. First of all, what I should say is, of course, South East London doesn't have the underground, but what we do have is Network Rail, and pretty good Southeastern services if you're going into London. So from Bromley to Victoria is only 15, 16 minutes on the fastest trains, and you have trains from Hayes going into London Bridge, and Elmsted Woods and Chislehurst into London Bridge and Charing Cross. So in terms of Network Rail going into London, we don't do too badly. The big problem is really the orbital direction of routes. Most of the bus routes, and you take Bromley for instance, 17 bus routes, so we're not short of buses in the centre of Bromley, but very few of those routes go actually outside the borough boundaries, and where they do, they go only to Lewisham, Croydon, and into Eltham in Greenwich. So it's pretty localised. So, for instance, Greenwich is very difficult to get to from Bromley, yet it's only about 5 miles. So what we'd like to see is some new transport corridors being opened rather than routes being replicated with the same number of buses going down, the same road. So that's one of the issues. And also, obviously, improvements in the orbital routes. We do have the tram at Beckenham, which goes to Wimbledon, which is pretty good. So I can't complain about that. I have to say, as someone who's getting on in years, I remember London in the 1960s when you basically couldn't cross the Thames. You had Holborn Viaduct, which was a dreadful little station, and obviously trains over to Victoria. Now with Thameslink, the cross-London links are much improved. And transport in general, I think, in London has improved immeasurably over the last 40, 50 years. So I don't think we can complain about that. But obviously, we're looking to see how can we improve it. Can we make the interchanges better? Can we make sure that those areas which are not properly served are served, and if necessary, by changing bus routes? So that would be my opening remarks. In terms of going out of London, we used to have the 402 bus that went to Tunbridge Wells. That was cut back to the Sevenoaks area back in 2017. Actually, unless you want to go to, say, to Westerham, transport links into Kent and into Surrey are pretty poor, and you're reliant really on Network Rail taking you by train to Tunbridge Wells or to Swanley and areas like that.
Be coming on to that, actually.
Yeah.
Moving on then, so the Centre for London recently recommended that Outer London should have a specific strategy and approach for transport. Do you think there is a need for a greater strategic focus on Outer London? Perhaps you want to kick off for that one, Councillor Bennett?
Yes.
Moving on. So, Councillor Costigan, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I might say a couple more words. I mean, I think in general, it's not so much whether there should be a separate strategy. I suppose we're probably neutral on that. The point is the actions that are in that strategy. Whether it's separate or whether it's within an overarching strategy, we need to ensure that we actually address those gaps and that we connect up areas of outer London, both on the orbital routes and the radial routes, to make a difference to the levels of connectivity we see at the moment. So, if we had an outer London strategy, it might do that. That might be the way of achieving that. Although, of course, you couldn't then look at outer London in isolation. Outer London, by its very nature, it's sandwiched between inner London and outside of London, as we've just discussed. And we couldn't lose that broader focus of understanding where outer London comes, within that. Well, it's not quite a sandwich; it's a donut, isn't it? So we'd have to understand that in any strategy. So therefore, I wouldn't be as emphatic, perhaps, as Councillor Bennett in terms of it has to be an outer London strategy. It's actually what's in that strategy that matters, and does it deliver on the need that we've got at the moment.
Lovely, thank you. Well, certainly we're going to get the meeting moving along if we can keep our answers as brief as Councillor Bennett's. So, moving to question 3, I call on Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome everyone to the meeting. I also live in Outer London and reflect much of what you're saying is that it's a real mix where you are and where it is you're going, and it's always easier to get into London than perhaps some of the orbital routes across London. I'm going to come to you first, Geoff, and if Deirdre and Councillor Bennett, if you want to chip in, that's excellent as well. But Geoff, I'm just wondering, what are the main journey patterns across the London boundary, both from and into the county council areas?
So you put it rather well. It's a real mix. Can you hear me with this? I was a bit kind of nervous about... it really is a real mix. So there's a whole bunch of different journeys. I mean, obviously you get the ones into central London, you get the ones heading in the opposite direction, you get the ones coming from the home counties into outer and inner London. So there's a graphic at the back of the Mayor's transport strategy which does a job of trying to simplify that immensely and looks at the different sustainable mode shares, to lapse into jargon. And that graphic also sort of scales the different elements of it. So and that varies, of course, by different times of day and days of the week, of course. So obviously there's more flows into central London on weekdays on the whole, particularly these days, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. Whereas there's more sort of cross-boundary stuff in leisure and shopping and retail and visiting friends and relatives at other times. So it's a right old mixture. In general, the more the trip is central London based, the more likely it is to be public transport, walking and cycling on the whole. And the more it is outer London based, the more likely you are to have these sort of, if I can use the term, trip chains, where you go from one place to another, to a third, to a fourth. And in general, that's rather more difficult to serve effectively by public transport. Does that help?
It does. And Councillor Bennett earlier laid out that when you cross the London boundary, you suddenly run into transport that looks much different than what we enjoy in London. I'm just wondering, from a TfL perspective, what do you meet with sort of planners out in the county councils? How do you plan for those links up into public transport across London's boundaries?
Yes, we do. So we have our opposite numbers in the transport authorities. Mainly that means Kent, Hertfordshire, Surrey, Slough Borough Council, Buckinghamshire. And we talk about... It's a lot to do with roads, there's a lot to do with traffic management naturally these days. Ultra-low emission zone has been a big deal in the recent past for obvious reasons. But we also touch on buses and we touch on train services, particularly where we are the contracting authority for obvious reasons. So there are also TfL board members with specific responsibility for relationships with the neighbouring transport authorities. So yes, we do.
That's obviously funding. So I mean, I know Ellie Baker went to the opening of the new 84 bus, which goes from Hertfordshire into Barnet. But a lot of that comes down to funding. So the funding for buses outside of London, it looks very different, and obviously the passenger load is very different from what we would have in London. And how does TfL sort of plan for that when we've got bus routes that go between London and then into Hertfordshire, into Kent, into any of these places? So
there are about 50 or so TfL contracted routes which cross the boundary into neighbouring transport authorities. We look to do what we do within London in large part. Our terms of reference are set by the GLA Act to look at transport within Greater London and to and from Greater London. Now, there are certain particular places around the outskirts of London which are particularly good trip generators, So in Hertfordshire, to take the example, to a place like Waltham Cross, Watford, Boreham Wood, these sorts of places. And we run quite high-frequency bus routes there, or dare I say, certainly quite high frequency compared to many of the other routes in in Hertfordshire. And they also run very long hours on Sundays as well, which is relatively rare, or certainly the frequencies fall off markedly after, say, 7 o'clock in the evening or for much of Sunday. So we absolutely treat them with due seriousness. One small example would be the 107 into Boreham Wood. We're actually improving the frequency in the next month, October as it happens, and we look to do all the things that we normally try to do with bus planning, which is to try and meet demand at the busiest time and the busiest place and the busiest direction, essentially. So we take those flows very seriously. Having said that, we have budget constraints to meet. Only know that only to my finance department is suitably rigorous, as it must be, and we do take the to and from words quite seriously. So we can't just run bus services outboundary willy-nilly, as it were.
And obviously some of that will speak to the budgets of the county councils, and
and they have their own.
Yes, they have their own constraints as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Could I come in
yes,
here?
Please,
I mean,
please.
interesting you mentioned the 84. In the 1960s, when I were a lad, I used to go on the Red Rovers around London, and the aim was to go as far as you could on a red bus. And the 84 used to go to St Albans, and I think the 96 went to Dartford. I think it was a bus to Brentwood and another one to London Airport. So your aim was to get your 2 and 6pence, 3 shillings worth of bus journeys. But of course, then London Transport controlled the country bus network right out as far as Tunbridge Wells and St Albans and Hertfordshire, and that disappeared in 1970 when the GLC took over control of basically the red bus routes. And we've lost some connectivity since then. But interesting, talking about transport patterns, we used to have, till Direct Line closed in Bromley, I have to say Bromley Council's just bought it, as many people getting off the train at Bromley South from Kent as were getting on, because we had a number of banks and big insurance companies there. So transport patterns are quite interesting, that you have people coming in, and equally we have quite a lot of people who park and ride at stations like Chelsfield and Knockholt and then get on the train in central London because it's just on the London boundary and they can find somewhere to park. So there are some interesting patterns of movement. But to say, in outer London, certainly in southeast London, we are very reliant on Southeastern railways for our transport system. And I have to say, despite people being critical, on the whole, I think the railway system works pretty well in southeast London. Obviously, there are delays at times. And, of course, one of the great things now in London, if there is a problem on the railways, there's half a dozen other ways of getting to where you want to go. To give you an example, I used to sit as magistrate at Wimbledon, and I used to get the train from Bromley South into Victoria. And one day I turned up, the trains weren't running. 162 bus outside, straight to Beckenham Junction, tram to Wimbledon, and I could have taken half a dozen different routes to do it. And so that's the great advantage we have now. We're not constrained by just there being one route. It may take a bit longer. And I think it's a pity in a way that Transport for London doesn't produce a paper bus map now, and Geoff is reliant on a private individual to produce it, because people have lost that idea that if a train's not working, there are the buses, and it may take you 2 or 3 buses to get home, but you can do it. So I think that's something we ought to look at. How can we improve connectivity? Obviously, the internet's brilliant for that, so you can just type in 2 places, and it will give you a journey. I have to say, the Transport for London journey planner is not always the best one, and you think, how on earth is it saying go this route when you know that there's actually a much better way of doing it? So someone might look at your transport planner and see if we can improve that as well.
Geoff, go ahead.
Just to add, taking the long view, you see quite big changes in the pattern of employment in over London, and in particular the way employment has tended to cluster to a greater extent in central London. And there are fewer of the sort of office jobs, knowledge economy type jobs in the outer London town centres than some years ago. And that has changed travel patterns and made the railways in particular, a supremely good way of getting from suburb to city quite quickly, where those sorts of jobs are. It's not to say that outer London town centres are economic deserts, far from it. If you go to Croydon, that used to have big headquarter buildings there, Nestle being the famous one, not the only one, but now it's reinventing itself with tall towers being built all over the place, but more largely for residential. And that's made some quite reasonably big changes in travel patterns, taking the long view over decades.
In fact, I think it's now called TWATs, Tuesday, Wednesdays and Thursdays, working. And I certainly noticed that at our local stations. You can get a parking space at Elmsford Woods on a Friday or a Monday, but not on a Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday. And I think that's, obviously, COVID was the start of that, but obviously new technology as well. And as I say, Bromley Council's just brought the direct line building opposite Bromley South Station for our new headquarters. 2,800 people used to work there. They're going to have a headquarters in central London, I think, of just several hundred and a few staff in Bromley. That's the way the world is changing very, very rapidly. And clearly your committee will want to look at social changes and the impact that has on shopping centres, etc., and fast food shops, the whole thing that goes with that economy.
The Monday and Friday morning peaks are noticeably quieter than Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Not the evening peak so much, not nearly so much.
Just to come in on that, a couple of things on how the transport has changed. Absolutely agree. Across London, the twat factor, as Councillor Bennett has put it so eloquently. But certainly, we're finding that with people working from home, there is more of an emphasis now on those orbital routes, on being able to get across the borough that you live in, and when you're working from home much more often. And I think that's a change that perhaps TfL needs to take into account when looking at developing those routes going forward. Just to go back to the original question from the Assembly member, in terms of the home counties and kind of that link between Outer London and the home counties, I think it is important to understand and to recognise that whilst within London it's often quite simple and easy, though still barriers, working between boroughs. When we're working between London and those home counties, there are much bigger barriers. We do it, and we do it successfully, but it's still difficult. It's a much harder job. And I think there's a role for government potentially to facilitate and potentially fund those kind of connections, because it does sometimes feel that those connections sort of fall between two stools. It's not necessarily TfL's job, as Geoff set out, and it's not necessarily the job of those home county authorities. So I think that's probably where government might step in and clarify a bit more how that collaborative work can be facilitated and funded.
Just to reassure, 96 still goes to Dartford, and indeed it's extended to Bluewater.
Okay. I see we have some bus hobbyists here, which is fantastic. But I'm going to get the eye of the chair because I still have 2 more questions left, and he whizzed through his in record time. So I'm going to get back on track here. I'm going to come to you, Geoff, again first. Are you expecting or seeing any changes and journeys since the ULEZ expansion on the 29th of August? I know it's so soon after, but has there been anything noticeable?
It's too soon to tell, and a big deal will be, today and tomorrow with the start of schools and things.
I was thinking that as well. It's been holiday time, and now we're right back to school. I did not draft that question, but yes, I agree. Well, okay, so finally, we have 3 train operating companies coming after this panel. They're coming later today. It's Southeastern, GTR, and Southwestern. Do you have any observations about rail services in your area or strategic priorities for London?
Interestingly, I have sympathy with the rail operators. We recently had a revision of the destinations of some of the trains, and some terminuses were cut out from some routes. And obviously we got the moans from constituents that their train, which used to go to Charing Cross, was now going to Cannon Street or was not going to Cannon Street. given the complexity of the Southeastern rail network, I understand very clearly that if you can cut out many of the clashes on junctions, you improve the service. And so I actually supported, against the wishes of some of my constituents, the changes that took place last December, I think, because I think you have to look at the wider benefit to the public. And if it does mean that we speed up the services by have fewer trains crossing each other, then that's all to the good. So there are sometimes I think you've got to stand up and say, look, the wider benefit is for the whole community.
Anything else?
Yeah, just to come in on that, I guess, sort of taking a step back in terms of rail and probably tube as well, London councils have produced a framework, an investment an infrastructure framework rather, looking at rail and kind of, where we need to invest in the future. And certainly the West London Orbital is something that is, high up on our agenda in terms of looking at new routes, and that's on top of Crossrail 2, which we think has the potential to transform north-south services in the same way as the Elizabeth line has transformed east-west services. So there is, I think, for TfL, in terms of those connections, it's really important that we make sure that those are factored in going forward. But for the rest of the rail network in London, I think, if I'll give an example from Ealing, we had the old, what was called the push and pull from Greenford into Paddington. And, with the changes that we've seen, and including with the Elizabeth line, that now stops and doesn't go as far as Paddington. So it's kind of, it's a bit of a disconnected service now, and it's a little bit isolated sat there. And it would be good to see more use made of some of these lines in outer London that could be brought back into use. There are other lines in outer London that could be, bearing in mind the changes to the economy post-COVID, etc., that could be brought back into use. So I'd like to see some of that looked at. Of course, one of the issues is the huge gaps in service with some of the rail connections. So I personally live right beside Northolt Park station, which is Chiltern rail. And actually, it's a great little service. It's a great service, brings you right into Marylebone, depending on where it stops, between 11 and 22 minutes. So it can be really fast. But unfortunately, you'll wait at a minimum of half an hour and quite often 40, 45 minutes between trains. So you've really got to time it exactly. So it's not the sort of service that you can just kind of pitch up and get into town. It's a service that you very much have to, I give myself 6 minutes to walk and 4 minutes to kind of get sorted on the platform and all of that. So you have to be you have to plan a lot in outer London if you want to travel on the railways in West London, where I'm from. And I think that's an issue. So we really need more capacity, I think. We want to see more trains is the bottom line, I think, in outer London. There's just simply not sufficient of them. And it would take a lot of the pressure off the tube network, because Northolt Central Line station, for example, is another walk from where I live. And if we could redirect people from Northolt Central Line, which is packed, absolutely packed, and in weather like this is sweltering and the most uncomfortable way to travel in the whole of London, I would say. And if we could persuade people off of that, and equally to get on at Sudbury Hill or Sudbury Town onto the Chiltern Line, then that would really be helpful, I think, for the TfL service. But the issue is we can't persuade them on because there's not enough trains. It's not something, like I say, that you can just turn up and be guaranteed a train even in 15 minutes. You'll wait a lot longer. So, yeah, I think that's the key thing on it. Of course, there's also the ticket office closures. I know you've written a letter, and I think that's great to hear. In Ealing, we've done the same thing. Castlebar Station in Ealing is going to see the ticket office closed, and I think that's concerning as well, because you do need still assistance. Some of those very isolated stations, some of these stations are in quite isolated areas where I think it's important that you have somewhere you can go to if you need assistance.
Geoff. And then
just to note that the cost pressures which the national rail operators are under, both in terms of service levels and in the name of levelling up, in the amount of infrastructure spend that there is these days, which has fallen from, say, a decade ago, and that has a very great impact. I mean, one of a pressure group used to great effect the fact that using government numbers, or purportedly using government numbers, that transport spending in London is peculiarly high. And that's one of the great misunderstandings of government data of all times, insofar as if you divide by per head, you get that result. If you divide by per trip, you certainly don't. And that number includes all sorts of head office functions and overheads. So it's really made a difference, that sort of thing, and it's put our train operators, National Rail train operators, in a terrible bind as a result.
I can understand the government's position when it's £750 million a month to subsidise Network Rail, that there are concerns about operating costs. But just three issues. Mayoral control of suburban rail network. I can see the argument for those lines which are actually only in Greater London, but if you take in Southeastern's area, we have the Hayes line, which is totally in Greater London, but so many of the rail lines are coming from Dover and from Tunbridge Wells, etc., that the mayoral control would be very difficult on those lines. Secondly, on the Bakerloo line extension, we're very supportive of it coming to Lewisham because it will open up a new transport corridor down the Old Kent Road. But what we are opposed to is it then going on the Hayes line to Hayes. We have perfectly good railway service at the moment with up to 12 coach trains, in full-size trains, and replacing that with tube trains, which of course are about half the size of a normal networker stock, would not be to the advantage of our constituents, and would there's a perfectly good connection at Charing Cross if you want the Bakerloo line as far as they're concerned. So we support up to Bakerloo up to Lewisham, but no further than that. And the last point I'd make, and again, it's this communications. There used to be a map called London Connections, which was very useful for people looking at the network and seeing how close some of the stations are to each other. West Hampstead's a good example where there's two West Hampsteads. Bayswater and Queensway, I think, are literally walking distance between them. Particularly the point that Deirdre makes about actually encouraging passengers to consider other options where some stations are totally over capacity.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you, and thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to slow down your rate of questioning.
No worries. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, I've got indication from Assembly Member Garrett.
Morning, everyone. Just a quick aside, not particularly to ride to the defence of TfL. What I would say, though, on the TfL Transport app, while that's not the app that I would use, I think it's worth commending TfL for its open data policy, which enables all of those other apps which are better. I think that's actually, I'm saying that better because it's the ones I use. Anyway, but I think it's all enabled by TfL's open data, which I think is very important. So I'd just like to quick vote for that. So we've been talking about transport in outer London, and we've spoken about buses, and we've spoken about trains a bit, and we're going to come on to talk more about buses and trains and bicycles and things. But, I mean, most households in outer London, including most households in the poorest group, have a car. So, and car journeys make up a substantial proportion of the transport activity in outer London. So what do you think, kind of medium to long term, is the role for the car in transport in outer London? So perhaps we'll start with you, Nicholas. I know Bromley has quite a few people who use cars. What does the long term? Oh, sorry, Geoff. Well, you can start if you want.
Sorry.
So I did say I'll start with Nicholas, but I'm not going to be dictatorial about it.
No, you're absolutely right. There are very many journeys in the Borough of Bromley which can't be done by public transport, particularly late at night. We have a very large teaching hospital, the Princess Royal. Many of the staff come in from Kent and from Surrey. The only way, if they're on night shift, they can get there is by using their cars, which is why we were so adamantly opposed to ULEZ, because for those people it's 25 quid just to go to work for a night shift and going back in the morning. So we are unashamedly pro keeping the car in Bromley. We don't go in for low traffic neighbourhoods. We don't go in for humps. We don't go in for 20-mile-an-hour zones, except in high streets and outside schools when they're coming and going. We've resisted all the things which inner London is doing, and I think you'll find transport speeds in Bromley are a damn sight quicker than they are in Lambeth or Lewisham, our neighbouring boroughs.
Thanks. Okay, Geoff.
So there will always be a role for the car. I mean, I draw as if this were needed, Policy 1 of the MTS, which says that we would like an increasing share of journeys to be made by so-called sustainable modes, or public transport, walking and cycling. But it doesn't say 100% or anywhere near it. It's by 2041, 80%. And there'll always be a range, just as there is now. And you see, if you look at different, that statistic by boroughs now, there's a really very wide range indeed, from the outer London boroughs, which tend to have a much lower sustainable mode share, through to the City of London at the other extreme, for example. And one would expect that to continue. And it really is horses for courses. And we discussed last time some of the transport characteristics of outer London in terms of its relatively high levels of car ownership. And its lower population density, and we mentioned earlier the fact that there are such a greater mix of journeys of often rather greater complexity, and that all means that the car will have a continuing and greater role in outer London than it would in some other parts of London.
You think there is enough recognition within TfL that the request for people to switch, say, from cars to something else sometimes looks like a request to spend significantly longer on a journey, which is not an appealing option for people? Putting it diplomatically.
We are trying to make it such that that request is less difficult to undertake. So hence, for example, over time, I draw here again on the Mayor's transport strategy. Go far enough into it and you'll find a section on reshaping the bus network, for example, and that says that we'll put more time, energy, resource into the bus network in outer London. And if you look at the data, then that's what's happened. So there's an increasing number of bus kilometres, goes up and down a bit with the profile of what happened in COVID and so on and so forth, but more bus kilometres in outer London, rather less in inner, in contrast. And that's one of the ways, amongst many others, by which one can try to make a transfer from car to public transport, walking and cycling as painless as possible.
Okay, thanks, Geoff. Sorry, I won't reiterate, we won't go over the ground. You're right, we did go over it a bit before. Sorry, Deirdre.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement, which is great, that certainly there is, of course, still a role for the car. And I think the point has to be finding that balance, doesn't it? And I think that what we're trying to do is to understand that, our road network is a shared area, really. There's pedestrians that need to cross it, there's cyclists that need to go along it alongside cars. And it's about making sure that we've got, a modern road network that caters for all road users. And that's in terms of safety in particular. And I know the boroughs do a massive amount of work with TfL on ensuring that our junctions are safe, and that we've got the Vision Zero plan that we're all committed to, really, which is reducing road deaths to zero in London. And I think, it's absolutely commendable and an important ambition that we probably don't make enough of. It would be a massive achievement if we could do that. So it's about making sure that the car usage that, of course, we will continue to have is made safer for everybody in London. And, of course, that the cars that we use don't have the impact that they might have had in the past on air quality in London. And that we can make sure that we expand our electric vehicle charging points so that we can help car owners in London, meet the government's deadline for petrol and diesel cars to be outlawed, the sales of new cars, by 2030. So we're doing a massive amount of work to expand that electric vehicle charging point network, putting lots of time, energy and money into it. I think there's something like 11,000 electric vehicle charging points across London now, and in my own borough, just in the space of a year, we've doubled the number in Ealing of electric vehicle charging points. So there's really a lot of energy going into ensuring we help car owners to transition to what is the future of the car. So it's still car usage, but I guess in different ways. And I suppose Geoff is right in saying that what we want to do is encourage and entice people onto the public transport network and into walking and cycling, because it's actually more pleasant, easier, quicker or better than using a car. And it's that sort of positive, nudge theory, I think it was called in the past, but it's that more positive way of getting people, a percentage of people to switch to more active and sustainable modes of travel that we want to achieve. Because we just need, if there was a 10% change in the use of the car, that would have a big impact on air quality, on congestion, so people who did need to use the car would be able to get through our city more quickly. So that's, I think, the approach that we're taking across most London councils, really. It's just about trying to make sure unnecessary journeys aren't taken by car, because people find that there's no other alternative. The bus network isn't good enough, or there's not safe walking or cycling routes.
Can I say a few words about roads? One of the most frustrating things is that the TfL was responsible for funding the principal road network in terms of local authority roads, and since 2018 we've had a total of 280,000 for 2 projects, and we are having to repair basically roads which TfL should be financing out of our own budget. So one of the frustrations there is that the government is giving money for the pothole fund. We're not seeing it, and basically a London borough can be 4 times the size of a district council who gets their own allocation. So we are pressing government to actually disaggregate that from the TfL's budget and give it directly to the local authorities. In terms of air quality, of course, it won't be a surprise to the committee that the underground, I think, has far worse air quality than anybody else, and that's directly under the control of the mayor. So there are places which are being ignored at the moment, which are very important. On electric cars, one of the concerns is the weight of electric cars and the impact that's having on the road network. We are very supportive. We have just launched 40 charging points on lampposts, and I launched only the other week e-Gully, where we put a trunk across the pavement so that people who don't have a driveway can charge in the road. Of course, it doesn't guarantee that they'll have a parking space outside when they want to do it, but it does mean they can put the cable underneath the pavement without interfering with people walking along, tripping over the wires. But in a sense, we are going to be led by private enterprise on this. We don't run petrol stations, and really it will be up to the free market to decide to a large extent where they want to put charging points. We'll obviously encourage them, but we don't see it as primarily the local authority's purpose to become effectively a petrol station. We're fortunate in Bromley that probably a good percentage of our motorists have got their own driveway, so if they wish they can charge on the driveway. But there are issues on electric cars, and obviously not the batteries and what's going to happen when they run out and how much they will cost. So I think we're still in the early days on electric vehicles, and clearly I know TfL has been looking at hydrogen buses on Route 7. I'm not sure they're very successful at the moment. They seem to be more off the road than on the road. But there are different modes of operating vehicles, not just electric, which we need to be looking at.
Thanks. Just on the VED, you make a good point. I know the Mayor makes a very strong lobby that the £500 million of car tax that is paid in London should go to him. But I suppose, as someone who represents 2 outer London boroughs, your neighbours in Croydon and then over in Sutton, I suppose I worry that if he had the money, he would just funnel it to TfL, who would spend it in central London, and we wouldn't see any of it, and you wouldn't see any of it. So I think you make a good case that maybe it shouldn't go to him, but should come to the boroughs, and perhaps the boroughs where we have more roads and more cars on them. But that was the end of my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Good. So, moving on, Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. If I can start off with a couple of questions on the Superloop, and maybe start with you, Deirdre. Will the new Superloop bus network address the need for fast orbital connections around outer London? And if not, what other changes are needed? And I know that you earlier did say, and I quote, we need to have more of an emphasis on orbital routes. And you already given some examples from Ealing, but would welcome your thoughts.
Right, thanks for the question. So I'm a huge fan of the Superloop because it's just around the corner from me. I can get what was the X140, but has now been renamed the SL9. And that's the local Superloop that will go to Heathrow and also to Harrow from where I live. And it has been a real game changer, I think. It has made a huge difference. It replaced, in its kind of earlier incarnation that then became the Superloop, it was sort of the prototype for the Superloop, I suppose. It replaced a line that, stopped all over the place that still exists. It's a bus route that still exists, so that hasn't been lost. But it's a much faster, quicker way to get, from kind of one bit of London to another. So I think it has been great. It's really well used. It's very, very popular. And I think the overall route that's still been consulted on. So there'll still be tweaks, I understand, to where it might go and what exact stops it would go at. I think it will go some of the way towards addressing some of the gaps that we've got in outer London. But I've definitely got to say some of the way because there is still a long way to go to address some of the gaps that we see. I think we're very aware that TfL have got a lot of great data on, current bus routes and how they're used, how popular they are. But what the boroughs have is information and data on where people actually want to go. And that's the key thing. And I think we've got to get that balance right. And I think there's probably a lot more work we need to do to collaborate and to share data between the boroughs and TfL so we're able to identify where we need to extend the network. We've got, say, data in Ealing, and I know, other boroughs will have the same, of where there are areas of the borough where you can't get to a town centre. Like I say, we have 7 town centres. There's areas where you can't get to any of them on one bus route, or where you can't get to a hospital on one bus route. And I think it's really important that both of those things are achievable by, the vast majority of Londoners, and there are gaps at the moment. So the Superloop will go some of the way and is a brilliant start. I think it's absolutely amazing. But, once it's in, we then need to build on that and find these areas where there's more connections needed. Of course, funding is going to be key to that. We absolutely get it. And I know new bus routes are massively expensive. And, we know that the kind of funding deal that we've got at the moment between the Mayor and central government is, really not sufficient for the kind of increase in bus networks that we need in outer London. If you look at it, it's simply not enough to address that need. So we will need, I think, an understanding both at London level and at a national level that if we're going to make a difference to transport in outer London, there needs to be more of a focus on ramping up bus networks and on, crucially, giving us the funding to do that.
Thank you. If I can come to you, Nicholas.
Yes. Originally, I was a bit of a cynic about Superloop. I thought, is this just vinyl wrap on existing routes? And in fact, the first one, the 607, I think basically is that. It has the possibility of being an improvement to our bus services. So I would say the jury's out at the moment. One of the good things is that TfL have listened to us on, I think it's SL3, or is it SL5? Never remember. SL3, and they've now extended it to Thamesmead, which I think is good for 2 reasons. First of all, Thamesmead is under transport at the moment, and secondly, it's now going to Abbey Wood, where it gives a connection to people in Bexley Heath for the Elizabeth line. So I think that was a sensible decision. In terms of the SL5, which is going to go from Bromley to Croydon, we have made some suggestions to TfL to reroute it, so A, it will be faster, and B, it will touch a number of population centres which it bypasses at the moment, and it will also open a new route that doesn't have buses on it at the moment. So we're moderately enthusiastic at the moment, and we'll wait and see how it works out in practice. There is another route, at the moment it's called the X239. I can't remember what the SL number is. Geoff will tell me which SL5. No.
SL5.
No, SL5 is to...
Oh, sorry, 239, SL4.
SL4. That's coming in 2025, I think, when the Silvertown Tunnel is finished, and that will run from Grove Park to Canary Wharf. It stops 5 minutes journey from Bromley. We're having this argument with Geoff, and I've had it in the cafe already, that it should be extended by a further mile and a half into Bromley, so it serves a very large population, because our connectivity into East London is pretty poor. Coming here today, it was 3 modes of transport to get here, and that would really open up for all the people who work in Canary Wharf area if it came to Bromley. So we'll have that argument there. So at the moment, I've gone from atheist to probably agnostic.
Geoff?
Well, maybe unsurprisingly, but I'm an enthusiast. I'll tell you why. Though under no circumstances do I think this is some panacea. It isn't. It's a useful contribution to transport policy to get the kind of outcomes that many of us want to see, and to make life of outer Londoners just that little bit better, and to improve the connectivity in those sorts of orbital trips, of which there are so many. So why? Because journey times will be faster. It's not the be-all and end-all journey times, but it is a reasonably large contributor to travel behaviour. We are trying to get the quality of vehicles up on some of those routes. Some of the routes are existing ones, so that will take time, so it's not an immediate thing, but the vehicle specification, to lapse into jargon again, will be a bit higher than your regular London bus. Now, obviously having 10 routes, it's a drop in the ocean in the context of 675, but one of the features of it that we've tried to make a lot of is its interchange opportunities with other railways and other bus routes, such that 90% of outer London residents are within one change of the Superloop. And note, I explicitly make the point that interchange is an important part of this, and the quality of interchange therefore matters too, in making sure that we make the most of this network. It's pretty rare that one bus route will do brilliant things for a absolutely vast population, but with the interchange it can do quite good things for many. Obviously we have to pick our routes fairly carefully, because they are supposed to be faster, they are supposed to have characteristics of an express route. So that means that Deirdre said that the X140/SL9 cohabits with the all-stops service. So you need a corridor which can support the both, because it will be of little use if we just merely deleted 2 in 3 bus stops, if you see what I'm trying to say, and you just have the 1 in 3 bus stops left for the express route. And we also need roads where the express route has some fighting chance of overtaking other traffic, notably the all stops bus route. So it's not the sort of thing that can go everywhere and be everywhere. You have to pick the right possible routes. And lastly, it's not a panacea in the sense there's all sorts of other things that one needs to do. So one example would be the other connections that we need to achieve as London evolves. We mentioned it over the long view, but there are all sorts of parts of London which are evolving quite fast, and you see them on the trains and buses on the way here, and we're running more or new bus services to those sorts of places. So I'll read out half a dozen examples, but Haringey Heartlands and Colindale and parts of Croydon and the Lee Valley and Wealdstone and Brent Cross. These are all places where you see really large developments, tall towers growing up, lots more population, and we'll need to link them in as they develop and new town centres or new population centres emerge. So it's not a panacea, but as I say, I'm an enthusiast.
Can I come back on a point that Geoff has made about the quality of the buses, because that's very important. If you're going to get people out of their cars onto a bus, what you don't want them is on a dark bus which has seen better days and I'm afraid sometimes not driven very well when you're jerked around. The 63 bus route, which used to be my home bus route as a boy, has got the latest buses on it, and they are a step change from previous buses. Nick Rogers Rogers and I went to Bexley Heath Garage some time ago to see the 132, the inverted pantograph, charging there. And we are promised on the 358, we are having the ISAR tram bus. It should have been in service some months ago, but unfortunately I think TfL didn't realise, we haven't given them planning permission, that they had a tenant on the land at Orpington bus station. So these buses are now being stored, I think, at New Cross Garage. So we look forward to them coming into service because, again, they are a step change in terms of passenger comfort. And certainly when we went on one of them from Orpington to Bromley and back, they're a head turner. People do actually see that there's a quality change in the terms of the buses. But I come back, driving skills is very variable on TfL services. The bus I was on this morning to Elmslie was very badly driven, and yet you go on a next bus and it's driven perfectly well. The driver doesn't go on his brakes. So I'm hoping TfL might actually look at driving standards because they have deteriorated in some areas.
Just to come back briefly on certainly the quality of the Superloop and what that bus network is going to look like in the future. The other issue that Geoff mentioned was the reliability, the speed of the service, and I think that's key for people in choosing those bus routes. Certainly, they need to get you from A to B, in a decent amount of time that you can rely on, and that you'll be able to turn up wherever you're going on time. Some of the routes that we've got at the moment, the nearest route to my house, for example.
Sorry. That's a very good point. But you've made the point, so thank you. That's fine.
Sorry, I was just going to come in on there.
I was going to come in and ask you about speeds.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Sorry about that. I was just going to say that's every 28 minutes in a bus, not the train station that I made earlier. Apologies, Chair. It was about the speed of buses. And what I was going to say was just on the back of Councillor Bennett's point earlier, the state of the roads is very important to the speed of buses, including the Superloop. So that really does kind of buy into that reliability point that TfL are trying to push. If we don't have roads that are free of potholes, we're going to find that even the Superloop will struggle to get through some of the streets in London. So funding is absolutely crucial for boroughs.
Sorry, if I can, thank you, Deirdre. If I can come back to you, Geoff, and you give some examples of the evolving London, and I'm sure you didn't mean to exclude East London in particular, the fastest growing population. London's move, continual move eastwards. But in that context, actually, I want to ask you about the SL2 very specifically. I know that my colleague, Assembly Member Pigeon, will have some questions on the various, on the consultation process. But coming to the SL2, in its current form, it does not address the specific needs of Outer East London, namely Dagenham, Havering, Rainham, and other adjoining areas. What are your plans to address this glaring omission? Councillor Costigan talked about possible tweaks to, I think the example used was in West London, to the Superloop there. Would you consider tweaking the SL2 so that it actually benefits the residents of Outer East London, and in particular Dagenham?
Obviously it's been out to consultation, and the consultation closed yesterday, if I remember rightly.
I responded as well yesterday.
So we'll look at what the responses say and make decisions accordingly about the nature of what we want to do in the short run and how we might want to evolve the Superloop network in the medium and longer run. So the SL2, in thinking about the routes there, we looked at what some of my previous comments apply about where the levels of demand are, how it can cohabit with other existing bus routes, because we don't want to leave parts of the routes unserved, the worst case scenario, and we need to have the sorts of roads which are appropriate as well, and we don't want to compete with railway services and other public transport, because that will offer poor value for money, and in any case railways will always be rather faster than buses, other things equal, and the nature of the journeys are often rather different in terms of their length as well. So we'll take all that, we took all that into account, and that's why we ended up with SL2 as the proposal that we have. We'll see what the consultation says, and we'll do a consultation response accordingly. It will be quite a big variation to send SL2 across to places like Rainham, fairly obviously. So there might be something different that we can do there with other routes in the future, or it might be that we want to change the bus network in that part of the world more generally. There are other consultations that we've had to improve north-south connectivity in Havering that would be quite impactful. Not express routes, but ordinary routes, but they go quite fast because they're on that sort of roads which where journey times can be quite fast. So there's all sorts of things that we can do, and it's part of an evolving process with multiple routes. A list that would, which I'd quite like to read out, but would bore you all about all the other changes which are in the pipeline or are in the works in some other way.
Well, I certainly don't get bored talking about the 86 bus and the petition signed by 1,000 residents to extend the bus service to the Queen's Hospital, because Deirdre talked about in Ealing that they don't have one bus route which gets to the local hospital, and so please do bear in mind the 86. But
the 86 has some specific peculiarities, namely, one of the constraints is. It's really rather dreary and arcane, but it's just standing space, and there we are, run out of standing space at Queen's Hospital, and that's the significant problem there. And it's the nature with the Superloop. Another problem I didn't mention in my previous list is finding places for buses to stand out of service between their legs in service, and that's really quite difficult at some locations. Walthamstow springs to mind in the case of SL2.
I'll write to you about the 86 because I don't take up time in this meeting. But a couple more questions, Geoff. The bus action plan says to meet the Mayor's 80% mode share target, up to 9 million daily journeys may need to be made by bus by 2041, increasing from some 6.1 million before the pandemic. The scale of change will be most significant in outer London, with some of the highest percentage increases in bus demand forecast to be in these boroughs. Can you tell us what is going to be driving this increased demand in outer London?
Okay. A whole range of factors. So we mentioned some of them already. Some of the, lapsing into jargon again, but customer experience, which means the quality of the vehicles that we've discussed, and Councillor Bennett mentioned the 63. We've started to procure more vehicles along that, with that similar set of characteristics in the way that the 63 is. So there'll be a lot more of them. A bus lasts 14 years, so it takes time for it to go across the whole fleet. But that's part of it. The countdown, the app, getting customer information through more effectively, the quality of stops as well, and getting the information up at stops as well. Again, on the 63, you'll see some, for lack of a better word, very large televisions which have all the real-time information brought to the stop directly, as well as all the paper and timetable stuff and spider maps that have typically been there. Refurbishing bus stations. There's a whole range of things around safety and security. You mentioned driver training and trying to get the quality of driving up. We do monitor it, but monitoring it is one thing. Having a bad day on the in the driving seat is another, and part of that's driving quality, and part of that is potholes at the side of the road, for that matter. That matters too. The signage, fares evasion, bus safety standard in the round. We mentioned journey times already, and we mentioned connections in terms of all the different places in London which are evolving quite fast. And yes, I omitted some, but there's a longer list of all the sorts of places which we have in mind where we want to bump up service volumes. And also around the types of vehicles and decarbonisation and the move to zero-emission vehicles, of which hydrogen is a small part, as Councillor Bennett mentioned, but electric buses are another, and they have a different look and feel to them to some extent, and ones which we hope that customers will find more to their taste. So some of the examples there.
One last question, Chair, if I may. I'm conscious of the time. Geoff, this is to you specifically. I think we already talked about the issue of bus speeds, but if I can ask you this. So there's been a clear correlation between declining bus demand and deteriorating average bus speeds. Research shows that a 10% increase in journey times can, on its own, lead to a 6% fall in bus demand. What are you doing to increase bus speeds in Outer London so that buses can play their full part in increasing sustainable mode shares?
So, two things. Firstly, I absolutely recognise that number because I think it comes from my research.
Geoff, yes, it does actually come from...
But there's two broad things. Firstly, there's running more buses, and secondly, there's running the buses which already exist to better effect. By the latter, I mean various forms of bus priority. So that means more bus lanes. So we've got a programme of 25 kilometres more by a date in 2025, trying to coordinate roadworks better, not least on the borough network where the vast majority of bus kilometres are actually run, how parking and curbsides are managed, bus gates, streets and junctions, and the cycles, optimising the cycle times of traffic signals. That's a really big deal. Lots of delays at junctions for obvious reasons, and enforcement. And then in terms of the volume of bus service and frequency of it, I mentioned it earlier that the MTS mentions reshaping the bus network and running a greater volume of bus kilometres, Superloop being part of it but not the only part, of more buses more frequently to more places in outer London.
Thank you, Geoff. Thank you for your research materials as well. And thank you, Geoff.
Thank you. All right. Well, that took an inordinate length of time. We are running out of time, so and I do want to get through all the questions for this section. So, can I just ask that members be mindful of that, but also if our guests could be a little bit more concise in their answers, please, and perhaps slightly fewer personal examples would be very helpful. Could I now go to Assembly Member Pigeon?
Lovely, thank you very much. My question's just to you, Geoff, from TfL, but thank you, boroughs, for coming. We really appreciate it, and London councils, because we haven't had London councils represented for a long time at our committee. I want to pick up, so we've talked about the Superloop. SL2, 3 and 5 closed yesterday, the consultation. When are you expecting, what's the timetable for decisions on the final routes, and what's the next phase in consultation on the other routes? Because it's only part of this Superloop that's out there at the moment.
Back at the ranch, we'll be going through all the very large number of responses. So something would come to me to have a proper look at in early October, and then we would start also where we have started, present tense, working with the operators to get prices for how much it will cost to introduce these, and to work through the very long list of practical issues. I mentioned one, which is standing at Walthamstow, but there are lots of others in also, not least in Bromley and Croydon, for that matter. So that means making an announcement. I'm making this up a little bit, but let's call it the end of October, and then it's not like there's a bunch of buses and drivers all ready to rumble, so there's a mobilisation period. That's the most tricky bit. The operators have to do that. So you're talking about an introduction of the service February, March time, something like that. That's if all goes well. There's
many a slip. At the earliest,
many a slip, twixt cup and lip, and all that kind of stuff. So that's a sort of putative time scale.
That's for those three. And then do you have a time scale for the consultations on the rest of the loop?
So the other ones which are extant are SL10 and SL1. So that closed back in July. So we should be able to issue the consultation response. I'm putting, my colleagues won't thank me for this, but let's call it later this week. And that means that, meanwhile, again, back at the ranch, all the commercials are being done, and we might be able to get it in place in December or early January for those two. Again, there's a bunch of practical difficulties which we're working through in terms of roads and lines and signs and all the rest of it.
I understand. I'm glad the discussion you at last brought up bus priority network, which has to go hand in hand with this, otherwise you're just going to have these buses stuck in traffic. But I wanted to pick up alongside this because, you know, the jury's out whether this will deliver, but it's an increase in orbital travel, which we all really welcome, and we hope it's not just rebranding, as we've heard already. But in some boroughs, and we heard evidence clearly last time, Sutton, for example, the orbital bus route Sutton to Kingston, the 213, you have reduced the number of buses per hour at a time when ULEZ expansion is happening and before you've got this comprehensive new Superloop in place. And I just want to understand, what is your thinking there? Because it seems to contradict everything and the whole switch to sustainable modes. And likewise in Richmond, the Mayor cut 493, the H22 and the H37, which again has reduced the options for many residents, and they may feel the only option they've got is to hop into their car when we don't really want to encourage that. So now how do you justify these two policies sitting side by side?
So first thing to say is that you pick some examples of reductions. There are some counter examples of increases in those same boroughs, like Sutton Route 127, which we increased by a precisely similar amount from 5 to 6 buses an hour. But with the 213 in particular, the reason for that is that we reduced the frequencies such that we run as many buses as are required at the busiest time of day, at the busiest location, in the busiest direction. And the nature of the 213 was that it had the usage of the 213 had fallen at that busiest point, which I think is Norbiton, by 25%. So we reduced the frequency from 6 buses an hour at relevant times to 5 buses an hour as a result. And that fall of 25% was a durable fall. It wasn't a flash in the pan. It wasn't a week or 2. It was there for seemingly for the long term. There is no virtue in my running more buses at the busiest time of day than are necessary. It just means more emissions, carbon emissions, for example. So that is the reason why I cut that particular example. Now, I could have kept running the 213 at the same frequency, but why would that have been a virtue? We tried running it for many years after that reduction in usage was observed, and nothing was changing. So one optimises the use of resources, just as we have elsewhere. I mean, I keep quoting the Mayor's transport strategy about reshaping the bus network, just as we've taken some capacity out of other parts of London, notably central London, because in that particular instance, other modes have got more attractive. We've upgraded various underground lines. Thameslink is in existence in a way that it wasn't a decade and a half ago, so on and so forth. So we always make these decisions to make sure that we make the best use of a limited and finite budget and a limited and finite amount of resources. Now, as it happens to the 213, which is between Kingston and Sutton, we are doubling the frequency of the X26 as was, such that such capacity was taken away is now coming back again, but by doing something different. That different thing being, of course, that the X26 only has 2 or 3 stops between those two places, as opposed to the all stops 213. So we shall see. I'm immensely interested to see whether my statistic of journey time and usage holds up in the case of the Superloop routes, and we see more usage coming back on that particular corridor, which we absolutely weren't seeing with the 213.
And you will be doing some detailed analysis of all of this, particularly with the ULEZ expansion, to see whether actually suddenly there are extra pressures on the network where you might need to increase resources.
You bet, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
that's
so
great.
we'll be looking at not just the Superloop routes, but the parallel routes to see if there's just been a mere transfer or whether there's been a net growth, which is what I would expect from all the previous research, and also, of course, to set that against the costs of what we've bought. So, yes.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to Assemblymember Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. So, talking about the Superloop, the proposals run entirely through London boroughs, but as someone who represents and lives in an outer London area, I know that that Greater London boundary for many residents is just a line on a map, and if you live somewhere, say, Feltham, that your life is as likely to be oriented towards Ashford and Staines as it is towards central London. And Councillor Bennett, you've touched on this. You talked about services to Tunbridge Wells being cut, for example, as someone born and raised in Tunbridge Wells. Gratifying to hear my hometown mentioned 3 times in the meeting. But I wonder if do you have anything to add about bus links to outside London? Do you review those as a councillor? What kind of improvements do you think would be beneficial?
Well, of course, it's not within our gift, but I'm sure that Transport for London is aware that Kent County Council's facing enormous budget constraints, not least because of the very large number of migrant children they've got to house. And I know that they have cut back on their support for bus services in the sort of Sevenoaks area. But really, it's out with my responsibilities or powers. But I don't know if Geoff can tell us about what talks he has with the counties.
Please.
Obviously my planners know their opposite numbers in the transport authorities' neighbouring hours, as they do for each of the borough our borough opposite numbers as well. So from time to time we talk to them, especially naturally enough when we're either doing an area study, which we do of different areas of London and thinking about changing bus networks in some way, or re-tendering of a particular route is approaching, and especially if that either of those comes up with any proposals for change. The other thing that we do, and some counties choose to contribute financially, especially where routes go a long way beyond the London boundary, as a few of them do. So obviously that prompts another source of conversations. And then, I think I mentioned it earlier, there are TfL board members without boundary responsibilities as well. So all these reasons prompt conversations.
And in those conversations, are you discussing demand? So that's demand from within London and from outside London?
That might be part of it. There'll be a range of what, if any, service plans, service changes we plan, and also whatever practicalities are happening in terms of routes and developments and changes to road networks and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. And I guess, how would you characterise the role that TfL plays in those discussions? Are you leading those discussions, or are you just one of a number of participants?
So for the routes for which we contract, we would be leading the discussion. And then there's a more there's a whole other conversation with multiple parties about how the commercial bus network on the other side of the boundary is evolving, if it is at all.
Okay. And from your perspective in TfL, how would you, what improvements would you like to see to those discussions around cross-border bus services?
Well, a feature of cross-border bus services is that often the usage begins to drop off beyond the boundary. Not true that the green belt and the boundary are one and the same, but nonetheless population density begins to fall away, and it's difficult sometimes to make the case for particularly intensive bus services because usage is relatively low. Meanwhile, that can be that there is a amount of money within the TfL budget for subsidising bus networks. That sum of money is not really there for county councils in large part, and therefore there's always a difficult conversation about the nature of what bus services to support and to what degree as you cross the boundary. And some are easier to support than others. I mentioned Feltham and Staines, and there are various bus services, 3 or 4 that go over the border to Staines, for example. And other parts, that's less the case because the usage is so much less. And Rickmansworth would be an example. But we're always open to discussions, but the discussions are sometimes a little on the short side because of financial constraints.
Understood. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, other members have indicated, but I'm afraid we are running behind time, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to move straight on to question number 7, which is Assembly Member Berry.
Can I ask one quick thing in relation to
Well, in theory, you've got the mic, so...
Sorry, I'll turn the mic on. Can I ask one very quick question in relation to the supplementary I asked for on the last question? Because I think it does have potential to be a recommendation from the committee. Question to Geoff about planning for bus services outside of that cross the boundary. The way you've talked about it, it seems like you're mainly talking about changes in frequencies to existing routes, rather than talking about potentially adding extensions to routes or new routes. Is that right? Because you talked about it being demand-led, and obviously if there is no bus, there can't be any trips for you to measure and see what demand is like.
Well, you can see more general flows from some data sources. But frequency is the most likelihood, or hours of operation on some occasions. Not new routes are possible, but there are 50 or so routes that cross the boundary at the moment. So it's not as if it's particularly rare, and frequency is the main tool that one has in mind.
So you mentioned area-wide studies or area studies, and how you do talk to local authorities outside of London when doing those. To what extent could a group of local residents get involved in requesting a new route as part of an area study? I mean, I'm asking because I've written to you about a very specific case yesterday, where a simple extension to a TfL route might serve a very car-dependent small settlement.
Well, it's a bit of a specific one. Obviously, it's a 4-kilometre extension, and it might cost about £1 million for a settlement of about 1,400 people. So that will be a reasonably big financial commitment for a route that, on the face of it, it will be hard to see it generating a lot of usage. This is all off the top of my head, by the way, so don't take this as gospel.
I'm looking forward to your more detailed answer about my letter about Netherton on the Hill. Yes. But yeah, in general, though, I've ended up writing to you because those residents didn't see a way of getting involved in an ongoing review process.
As this is very much a local matter, perhaps, Geoff, you could write
No,
to the
I'm
member.
asking how local residents can actually do that, because I've ended up writing a letter because there doesn't seem to be a process.
Just give a general
I'm not
answer
trying
then
to
how
discuss that.
members can write to you or the mayor or their assembly member or whatever.
So they can take it up with my planners. No problem with that. I have a dedicated planner per borough, but that's he or she will also look out boundary, because the routes rarely stop. All of the routes rarely stop exactly on the London boundary, or get in touch through the TfL correspondence unit is another obvious one, and they all feed through to me eventually, or indeed via any of you, of course.
Okay, great. And then the other question was, do you use PTAL's public transport access levels to look outside of London? Because
not outside London.
Because PTALs don't extend outside of London. Have you thought about extending the geographical coverage of PTALs to help you with that cross-border planning?
It will be quite helpful from my perspective, yes. And there's quite a lot of analytical oomph required, but it would be reasonably useful as a way of seeing where places are under or overserved compared to benchmarks.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Chair, that's where I wanted to get to. Right, moving on to active travel. And this is the question I've been given. So I'm just going to flick to it, sorry. I turned away from it. So I wanted to start with Councillor Bennett from Bromley, if that is okay. Earlier on, you talked about being pro keeping the car, but I've done some research via YouGov asking people in London, do they feel forced to own a car, and asking them to grade that on a scale. And actually a quarter of people in outer London have told me they feel forced to own a car. Now that's quite a strong word, and those people are, car dependent essentially. So I know that you will feel obliged and you will want to contribute towards the wider goals of the Mayor's transport strategy to help people travel in other ways. So I wanted to ask how you're doing that in terms of promoting active transport and helping to make sure that roads, even though you're enthusiastic about them, are not barriers to people getting around safely.
Well, part of it is making sure that the cycle lanes that we have, and we have constructed some new ones, if possible, are off-road. One of the big frustrations is that unlike Holland, of course, where cycling is a very popular thing, obviously it's flat as well, most of their cycling is done off-road. Here in the UK, basically it's a white line on a road. It may or may not be protected by a few what I call wands, but basically the cyclist is mixing with the cars. It would be very good if future road developments always, if possible, produce an off-road cycle lane. I mean, take the A21. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. you take the A21, which goes from Bromley out through Orping, Farnborough that way. You start off on the pavement, on a cycle lane, then you go on the road, then it disappears, and yet there's a bit of the A21 where there's plenty of footway where we could put in, if TfL were so minded, it's TfL Road, a separate off-road cycle lane. So I'd be very enthusiastic, if possible, for off-road cycle lanes. We're cooperating with Croydon on our next cycle lane at this very moment. But if I could point out, one of the big fears is road safety. That's one of my responsibilities. I have at least 100 projects I would like to advance. Most of that's done through the LIP funding. And London Council very helpfully have produced a set of statistics. In 2016-17, we were getting £195 million to the London boroughs for LIP. This current year, it's 65 million. So you can see there's been a dramatic drop. And road safety is pretty important. It's both footway repairs, carriageway, it's new zebra crossings, etc. People will be more likely to do other than motoring if they feel that it's safe to walk along the road, safe to cross the road, etc. So I would encourage the Mayor to look again at the LIP funding. We can improve the urban environment if we have more money, and that's really quite important to get people out of cars. Very excited with the development of electric bikes, for instance. I'm 74. My days of cycling uphill on a manual bike have gone. But I'm looking forward to buying an electric bike there, 3,000 quid. One of the things we are opposing, though, is e-scooters. There's a consultation out at the moment with London councils. We intend to opt out of the e-scooter scheme. We think it's very dangerous indeed. Most of the people who are doing it are not actually helping themselves, and they're a danger to other road users. But yes, all in favour of having proper cycle lanes. Unfortunately, if it's just a line on the street, we find that actually cyclists are still using the pavement.
Thank you very much. Obviously, my question wasn't about cycling alone, it was about active travel more generally, and you've talked there about road danger reduction and junctions, and it's really encouraging. You've got 100 projects to reduce road danger. Is that published anywhere, or was it just part of your LIP submission?
No, we have a list. We keep it to the officers because obviously if we published 100 projects, we'd get all sorts of public demand saying, why aren't you doing mine? And unless we have the money, a lot of them are just wishes at the moment. But we do try to use the money we get in the most sensible way and get the best return. Clearly, we look at accident statistics, we look at number of people using a particular location for doing it, and we've got a number of projects in progress at the moment.
Okay, that's really helpful. You talked about creating new cycle infrastructure, and obviously the debate about making sure that's segregated from traffic was a big feature of back as far as 2012. I think that was one of the main debates in the mayor election. Since then, there's been quite a lot of progress made by Transport for London in putting in segregated cycle lanes. Some of that, though, has come off existing road, the sort of driving lanes for cars and vans. Are you in favour of that kind of adaptation, and would you consider it for some of the roads you mentioned?
Well, one of the biggest things has been bus lanes, and although I'm in favour of bus lanes, what I'm not in favour of is 24-hour bus lanes. The mayor's gone over from having bus lanes which are 7 till 10 in the morning in terms of the rush hour, and now half the road space has been lost because it's just sitting there all through the day and the night. In Bromley, the bus lanes we've got are restricted hours, 7 to 10 in Widmore Road in Bromley, and outside that you can use the bus lane because there's hardly any buses coming down it. So road space has to be shared, and I fear the mayor is getting to the stage now where journey times in central London are down to snail's pace, and clearly that's not good for the economy.
Okay, there's a lot to digest there. I'll let that go on the record and won't challenge it, Angie, because I do want to bring in Councillor Costigan. So those are some issues specific to Bromley. How is London Council's working more generally across the board on planning for active travel, and what more support do you think councils should be asking for from Transport for London in terms of planning those schemes?
Yeah, I think the point about funding has to be reiterated again, and obviously you've given the exact figures. So everything that we do around active travel, we're funding it. We're funding a lot of it through the LIP programme, and the figures that Councillor Bennett mentioned there translate into about £2 million in an authority, and that's not a lot of money when you look at, for example, Uxbridge Road. We want a cycle lane all the way down Uxbridge Road. That is a long-term plan for us to address safety issues for cycling there. But it's £1 million per kilometre, and the road is about 10, 11 kilometres long. So it's not even the time it would take to do that. It's actually the funding. It's nowhere near sufficient, and that's a discussion that needs to take place, I guess, between the TfL discussion with central government about how funding is funnelled into London, and it's simply not sufficient really at the moment to address the need to move people into more sustainable modes of transport. But that being said, we have done a massive amount with the money that we've got. If you look at Waltham Forest, for example, and Outer London Borough, now they did benefit from Mini Holland funding, so that underlines, funding can unlock all of this for you. But they've got some really, really exciting cycle schemes there. But elsewhere across the capital, we've got the CS9 cycle route, and we've also got a lot of work around school streets. We've got 21 school streets in Ealing, and we've got a plan to make that 50 school streets. And that's a great way, I think, to get people to start to think of active travel when they're bringing the kids to school. And we're trying to, educate a new generation into thinking of walking and cycling before they would jump in a car. So we have, in a lot of boroughs, found that school streets are a great way to open that conversation with people. I think in terms of bike hangers, for example, the infrastructure, we've just doubled the number of bike hangers we've got in Ealing, and I know, again, across London, we're looking at doing that through a lot of the London boroughs. The e-bikes and e-scooters, we're looking, there's a variable offer across boroughs at the moment, and there is also a bit of a Marmite issue with e-scooters in particular, but also with e-bikes, and it's something that London Councils is very much working on. The big issue that we've got is we've had a promised transport bill for a few years now, and that transport bill was supposed to address the lack of any regulation really in the industry. So an e-bike provider, for example, can rock up to any borough in London and say, we're going to set up shop here today. And London boroughs don't have the right to say, no, or you've got to agree to this, that and the other. Now, we've done some brilliant work, and we've got some memorandums of understanding with a lot of the e-bike providers in many of our boroughs, but it's really a gentleman's agreement, it's not the law. E-scooters, again, there needs to be regulation. There's thousands of illegal e-scooters on the streets of London, and the police really don't have the time or the resources to make that a priority for them. A Transport Act, I think, might use the experience of the trial, the pilot that we're running in London at the moment on e-scooters, to bring in learning and to perhaps put in place regulations that the police could properly enforce. So the e-scooter pilot has a maximum speed limit of 12.5 miles per hour. You have to have a driving licence, for example, all of those kind of regulations. And that's really what we need realistically if we're to make a difference, because people are going to continue to buy illegal e-scooters. But I think having a transport bill that actually made the rules clear would mean that we'd be able to enforce against that, which we're not at the moment. But there's great work going on across London. The key issue is funding. It's come up in almost all of the questions that we've had today. It's ensuring that we unlock that funding so that we're able to do the work that London councils really want to do, and I think that people want us to deliver on as well.
Thanks very much. Yeah, and you mentioned the mini Hollands, and we were hoping to have Enfield here to discuss that. That was a very significant level of investment that we're not close to at the moment. Sorry, I'm done now. Thank you very much, Chair, Deputy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now look to Assembly Member Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. So focusing in on cycling, and probably a question to you, Councillor Costigan, with your London Council's hat on. How would you assess progress towards having a complete network of safe cycling routes around outer London, and are there any particular gaps that you would highlight?
There's certainly a difference between inner and outer London, and that's certainly an area I think that we need to focus on. I think, if you look at what we're doing in Ealing as an example, we've just recently gone out to people and asked them, with pins on a map, where do you want to cycle to? What are the routes that you want to see addressed? And also, what do you think the priority should be? Is it new routes, or is it improving existing routes? And, it's probably not rocket science. We probably should have figured it out before we asked people, but actually people have come back and said, we want you to improve the existing routes. So I think the routes are there, and we do have a fairly good idea where people want to get to. It's similar to the buses discussion. They want to get from town centre to town centre quite often, and so we know where many of those routes are, but it's about making sure that they're high quality routes and that they're safe routes, and that's where we need the investment. We're at the moment in West London, we're in the Visions for Northolt project. We've got segregated cycle routes going in along Kensington Road that will bring people down by the canal. That's going to be a great route. It's going to be make a real difference and stop people having to go along a much more dangerous main road, which they do at the moment. So it is really about putting that money into the junctions, changing the junctions, and segregated where we can. We won't be able to segregate everywhere. We live in a city that is built on hundreds and thousands of years, starting with animal tracks. So some of the roads are quite narrow, and of course there's always an impact on parking, and we need to balance the needs of businesses who continue to need loading facilities, for example. So there's a lot to think about when you think about improving the cycle network. It's quite complex and it takes time, but I think a good way to do it is putting in place those strategic routes first and then linking up. And I think TfL do a lot of work with the boroughs, really great work in identifying where are those strategic networks that are the kind of building blocks of what might be a more extensive outer London bus network in the future.
Thank you. And you, in your discussions with residents, and they're saying where they want to go, town centre to town centre, reflecting back to my previous question, which was around buses into outside of London, is there demand for cycle routes from London to outside London, and how are you working maybe in London councils with other authorities outside London to improve active travel links?
Yeah, certainly I think it's more within the boroughs, because it's not necessarily for very, very long journeys that people are most interested in cycling. It is journeys that are cyclable, in a certain amount of time. But, there's quite a lot of interest in cycling for pleasure and leisure going into boroughs outside of London. So that's certainly something that we would want to support. I think it is something that is underdeveloped at the moment, definitely. So it's potentially an area to look at. But, I do think that, our residents, say in West London and in Ealing, it's actually within the borough and, neighbouring boroughs and across London where they want to get at the moment to kind of connect up with, the economic opportunities, whether it's work and increasing numbers of people are cycling to work, or whether it is for leisure activities or going out or whatever. The new Elizabeth line, as part of the complementary measures for the Elizabeth line, we've been able to put in a lot of additional cycle parking at those stations, and I think that's really helpful to get those mixed journeys of cycling to a train station and then getting on the train. So more work like that, I think, to make it simpler and to have that seamless journey that could include a bike but might also include other modes of transport that might bring you outside of London. I think more work on that as well is really welcome, and I think is already coming into place with the Elizabeth Line measures.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett, just maybe to you, what kind of discussions are you having with your neighbouring authorities outside of London about active travel links?
I'm not aware we're having any, because if you take the reality of it, we've got the A20, the A21. They're the two arterial routes going into Kent. The rest of it will be country lanes. It has to be remembered in Bromley, the Darwin ward of Bromley, you can get the whole of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea into it and still have space. So, I mean, basically, most of the connections between Bromley and, say, Tatsfield in Surrey and Westerham are country lanes, and they're not suitable for cycle lanes at all.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have just got a couple of minutes. So, Assembly Member Boff, you indicated, sorry? We're still on buses, yeah.
Active transport.
Well, you can pick up anything in that section.
Okay. Just on active travel, when encouraging the use of the installation of cycle routes, does TfL have any requirements on consultation for those if the boroughs are putting in the cycle routes and they're being funded by TfL? Are there any requirements that TfL has for consultation to be carried out in an adequate way?
Not my specialist area of knowledge, but I think cycle routes require consultation, so we do, yes.
But you have no minimum standards that you would ask the boroughs to comply with?
I think there are minimum standards for how consultations are undertaken in the round. We have our own standards. I don't know how we apply them with boroughs.
There's no imposed standards?
I don't know. It's a short answer. I can find out and get back to you.
Thank you very much.
Interestingly, we've, with TfL, put in a cycle lane on Crofton Road in Orpington, costing £750,000. Very nice, coloured different road surfaces, off-road, on-road, etc. And we've been severely criticised by local residents for the amount of money that's been spent on what they considered a waste of money.
I think that's what I was getting at. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, well, I'd like to thank our guests very much for coming this morning. It's been very, very interesting, very informative. Nice to get the council's point of view, but very, as my deputy said, very nice to see London councils here. Thank you very much indeed. We're very grateful to you, and hopefully we can see a bit more of you as well, because I think you have a massive contribution to make to London. So we're going to have to take a 5-minute adjournment. Actually, if we come back at if we come back at 11:50, so it's actually going to be about 7 minutes, and then we move to our second section. Thank you very much.
Ring the gavel.
All right, welcome back to the Transport Committee. So we're now going to talk about railways, and once again we have Geoff Hobbs, who hasn't been substituted off. He's still with us. But we'd now like to welcome Cllr Mann, Managing Director of Southeastern Railways. Thank you. Steve White, Managing Director of Southeastern. Good afternoon. And Angie Doyle, Chief Operating Officer, Govia, Thameslink Railway. Thank you very much indeed. So, I'll move to our first question, which is Assemblymember Pigeon.
Lovely, thank you. And we're focusing on Outer London, and it's great to see you all. And obviously, I've worked with you all over some time, raising issues about often reductions in services or quality of services. Travelwatch have really helpfully provided us with a review of the public transport provision in Outer London for this piece of work we're doing. And within that, it really shows how over the last couple of years, your timetables have been reduced on the sort of metro services that Outer London rely on. So less frequent trains, shorter services, meaning severe overcrowding. So I'm wondering perhaps if I could go to each of you. I'm going to start with Angie, because you're over here, whether you might just explain why you've decided to make changes to some of your services. And I should just put on record, all of you have been very responsive when I have come to you over particular individual issues, but at a sort of strategic level, why are you changing services when, we would argue they're desperately needed?
See, this is being an A and a D. I get to go first. I think I preferred my premarital name of Wilson, and I'd always go last. Okay, good morning, everybody. Yeah, really good question, Caroline. The fundamental reason has been the change of COVID. Obviously, before COVID, we were running services in the metro area, and then during COVID, obviously, we've had to scale back because of demand. And now we've got the cost of living crisis and the cost of the budgets control. So that's really what's driving it at the moment, passenger demand and also costs. So when we look at our metro areas at the moment, we're actually running 81% of the trains that we were running pre-COVID. And of those trains, most of the reductions are coming off peak rather than during the peak services.
Okay. And that's for GTR?
That's for GTR, yes.
Okay.
I think the other thing to say is one of the things that happened during COVID as well is for, obviously, because now the DfT is picking up the whole of the funding pot for rail under the national rail contracts, is one of the things we were asked to do as part of reducing the cost was looking at where there was duplication of services between different operators, and that could be operators on lines of route that were shared between ourselves here and overground. So one of the things we were asked to do when we were doing timetable planning for 2020-2021 was to look at unnecessary duplication where we could maybe reduce some of our services, but it would be complemented by services in other areas. So what we may see is in our passenger numbers are now back to around 800,000 a day, which is about 80% of where we were overall GTR pre-COVID. But on the metro area, that's around about 75%.
Right.
So what we're seeing with some of that is abstracted to other operators. We are seeing that there's been some abstraction to overline services from West Croydon. So one of the things that we've done as operators is have a look at where we had shared services and what we could do in terms of we might have reduced some of our capacity and our services, but that might have been supplemented by another operator.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for that. Claire, can I come to you? With Southeastern Railway, and particularly I think you've had to pause your potential change to your timetable, is that correct? But there have been proposed reductions in frequencies from 4 to 2 at lots of stations across your network.
Hi, yes, thank you. So very similar to Angie, I mean, where we're at the moment is overall we're at 75% of pre-COVID numbers of customers on Southwestern, so we are actually the slowest return of all of the networks. And in the suburban area, that's at 74%, so it's very reflective of the London suburban area. So we're now currently running around 89% of the timetable we ran prior to COVID. And very similarly, we have taken out where we may have had more peak, sort of pixie buster one-off services in the morning peak that we had before. And also it's more off-peak where we've seen the reduction in services. But because we have enough capacity to meet the demand that we're now seeing, what we're doing is we're looking at individual lines of route where we're seeing a return quicker. And if we can put a case together for an additional service, so for example, the Epsom line, we've had that particular issue, we have done that. But in a similar way, because of the nature of the return, we have got this issue with balancing the books, essentially. Another thing for us is that we are seeing, as was described earlier, the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday pattern in terms of return, and Mondays and Fridays are exceptionally quiet in the peak. But customers, when they came back post-COVID to start with, were actually spreading out their commuting times in the morning peak. They're now back into that high peak hour where they're going back to their old journeys. So we do have this challenge where we are seeing much busier services in that hour again, and the shoulder peak is much freer. So the challenge we have is, as Angie has said again, once that we've got to balance the books and ensure that we've got the right level of service for the demand. Also on Southwestern Railway, prior to COVID, the timetable we had in place actually was quite throttling in the sort of Wimbledon to Waterloo area, whereby if we had any disruption, because of the amount of trains we were trying to funnel through, it really had a really bad ripple effect on performance. So we've seen our punctuality improve massively since we've changed the timetable. So what I would say is, as much as there are less services, there's enough for the demand, and also it's a much more punctual railway than it was prior to COVID. So we're trying to balance that, but also look again at whether we can put in new services when the demand is there for it to be required.
And can I just be clear?
Yeah.
Because you and Angie both talked about getting the books to balance, as it were. The budget pressures you're under, because you are funded directly, really, from government now.
Yeah.
That they are saying this is your budget, you need to have services to fit that budget.
So essentially we do an annual business plan review with the Department for Transport and set the budget for the year ahead based on the demand that we see. So the budget we have is there to provide the services if we can. So you referred to, I think, the December 22 timetable consultation, where we were going to uplift to about 91% of pre-COVID services, and we're going to put some additional services in. Because when it came to the budget setting process and the demand levels hadn't risen, we've been static for the last few periods at about 75%. We did not have the case to put forward to increase those services. So we've held them where they are. We've made adjustments to services where we might stop trains in a different order, where we're seeing a crowding issue on certain stations. But overall, what we're doing at the moment is sort of sits within the budget and also delivers the demand we see. So it works at the moment, but we have got an eye to try and look at where we can put the business case forward to the department if we think we need to increase frequency on certain routes.
Okay, so the only way to change your timetable and to increase the frequency is to prove to government there is a demand.
Absolutely, and we've seen, as I've said, we're the sort of slowest recovery rate from a commuter perspective, a real drop-off in terms of people
using. Is that from outside London rather than the metro?
Well, the metro area specifically and through Waterloo, we're at about 68% now of where we were before COVID, so that is a drop from where we were. Some of the sort of more local routes outside of London are strong, and leisure travel is really strong. So it's balancing, providing those services weekends and off-peak, and also doing what we can during the peak.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I come to you then, Steve, with the same question? Why have you decided to make changes to services, and particularly, obviously you've had a spotlight on you. I know you briefed me on it previously, on your changes of the destination in central London of trains, and that's given you and passengers a lot of challenges, shall we say?
Yeah, the story at Southeastern, good afternoon everybody, is very similar to that which you'll have heard from Southwestern and from GTR, with probably a couple of local flavours which I will add. So if I give you the big picture to start with, our demand is currently 75% of pre-COVID level, so almost exactly similar to my colleagues. And the three big operators in London and the South East have been some of the slowest to recover overall on a national scale. We're actually running about 86% of our pre-COVID timetable, so that wouldn't be dissimilar to a number of other operators across the country. But as I say, recovery in the southeast has been slower. We took the opportunity, as we discussed with you prior to the change in December, to try and simplify our timetable. At this period, this rather unprecedented period of low demand, we took the opportunity last December to really simplify the Southeastern Metro proposal. The basic idea was to introduce a standard hour, 4 trains per hour service all day, with far fewer trains in the peak where we were seeing fewer people travel, and far simpler operation of junctions like Lewisham, where in the off-peak previously there were 24 trains every hour waiting to cross over one another, and it was almost impossible to run a punctual railway. So our demand and our service levels are quite similar to that of our colleagues, I think with the exception that you're aware of, that because Southeastern serves so many London termini, London Bridge and St Pancras and Victoria and Charing Cross and Cannon Street, we have endeavoured to simplify our metro service. That's really about preparing to grow again in the future. You know, the ingredients of a high-performing metro service are a simple timetable, reliable infrastructure, reliable rolling stock, a great engaged and competent team, and then finally the specification and funding to grow again. So we are preparing to grow, but at the moment our metro is lagging behind the recovery of the rest of our railway, and that isn't a function of timetables, because customer satisfaction for the level of crowding on our services is basically the same now as it was a year ago. You know, we're dealing with other factors across the 3 operators. Last week we saw the 24th and 25th days of industrial action by the RMT. We've closed our railway for 13 days completely due to the ASLEF industrial action. So we are seeing that depress the number of journeys being undertaken on our network, not just on the days of action, but it also takes away people's confidence to buy a weekly ticket or a monthly ticket or to travel regularly. So our railway is starting to grow again. Last Thursday was 12% up year on year. This year we're targeting to carry about 135 million journeys. Last year was 117, so we are growing again. And when we do grow, as Claire said, we approach the department and we identify quite forensically the individual services where we need to add capacity. And we're normally able to make the argument, as we did last May, to add in additional services where the demand is evident.
Lovely, thank you for that. And I understand, you know, you are constrained by government in terms of up to a point what you can run, and you have to make the case and so on. But how are you responding to feedback on the impact on passengers some of these changes have been, and particularly the issue of, say, you've only got 2 trains an hour when you used to have 4? That isn't a turn up and go service. It's not necessarily an attractive option. And is there work that you should be doing, perhaps together as an industry, to look at how you get across to passengers, and you're simplifying your rail routes, but actually, you know, I use the metro train service as a tube. I live in Southeast London. I know where my key interchanges are. Is there something about changing the mindset of rail passengers to think of it more as a tube for those metro services, to maybe help with that sort of where you're giving up one operator running a route but you've got another? Is there something around that information to passengers to make it clear what the offer is? Perhaps I'll do it in reverse. Start with you, Steve.
Yeah, well, firstly, I would agree with you on a minimum service frequency. So all our metro services, with the exception of Bromley South, are at least 4 trains an hour all day long. I think there is a minimum service for a turn-up and go frequency. I also agree with you the need to advocate for the simplicity and the benefits of interchange. A lot of customers prefer a direct train from A to B, I understand that. But across the whole TfL estate, I know there's an average of 1.4 interchanges made on each journey because you told me that. So it is important that we recognise the value of interchange, and we promote that to our customers in a number of ways, such as on the website showing people the best way of getting from A to B, which might not be entirely by Southeastern. The other thing I would say to couple with the previous discussion earlier with Geoff, we've just responded to the Superloop consultation. We welcome the introduction of SL3 and SL5 routes across our network, and they're very good examples of bus provision of an orbital route to complement a metro service, which is principally a radial route, and create those interchange opportunities that you describe. Yeah. I'm sure we could probably do more to market and explain that, but fabulous apps like City Mapper, which I ask all of my staff to use every day, do give you the best way of getting from A to B using every permutation of transport mode available.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Claire?
I think in terms of working with Transport for London, we have regular meetings to discuss station travel plans and how we integrate modes better, but also, as mentioned already, the Superloop, already 2 routes that serve our stations are on the Superloop, and it's important that we continue to engage to look at opportunities. I mean, on Southwestern, we don't have as many 4 trains an hour metro type services that we haven't before COVID, so often they're 2 trains an hour as minimum. But certainly the importance for me and for our customers and feedback is that if those trains are punctual and there's the capacity, people will come, and we need to balance the timetable working punctually with the reliability of the network, which we're doing a lot of work with Network Rail on, and it has been much, much better, and lots of investment going into resignaling works, etc., which are making the services far more reliable. Balancing that with putting in additional services without the current demand. So it once again is a balancing act, but I do think that I believe that these 3 operators work very closely with TfL. I meet regularly with Geoff myself to talk about plans coming in on bus routes and any engineering works that are happening on either side, how we don't want to impact the customer, and make sure that we have those conversations early on and get those plans right. So there is a piece here about marketing and education, but we also need to be honest about delivering a very good, reliable railway. Southwestern isn't a luxury railway that goes to the sort of far parts with sleeper services and catering. We're not. We're a commuter service. We do have leisure travel, and ours is about getting the basics right. So it's really important we focus on that.
Lovely. Thank you. Angie?
Thank you. I think on the point of information, open access information has made it so much easier for people to understand what services are operating from their stations, like Stephen said. City Mapper will tell you everything about how to travel from stations. So those days where you had to go to individual train operators' websites, we've moved on from that. So information is much more freely available to passengers now to be able to see what the travel choices are from their stations. Very similar to Cllr, even pre-COVID, most of our metro services were 2 trains an hour, so we weren't running it for TPH. And again, I think some of the interventions that we have made is, as part of the cost cutting, we have taken out 100 trains, 2 complete fleets off of lease. Now, they were our oldest fleets. And we haven't replaced those, but what we have done is we've now replaced, particularly in the metro area, with better quality trains than customers were using before. So trains with better facilities such as toilets and customer information and air conditioning. And because now we're running a more homogenous fleet, we're able to look at how we optimise that fleet better. So in the areas where we are running 2 trains an hour, what we have been able to do is we've been able to add additional coaches. So our priority is, if we are running 2 trains an hour, to be able to create the capacity on those 2 trains an hour by adding on extra carriages. And also, again, as Claire said, we have seen a real upturn in reliability. So metro services are running at 94.5%. So when you do turn up for your train is on time, and it is a comfortable environment to travel in now. But again, we can always do more in terms of coordinating and linking in with other travel. I think one of the other things that we're working on at the moment is making it easier for people to interconnect using the same type of ticketing. So we're upgrading all of our stations at the moment to have barcode ticketing on them because we're seeing a big increase in people using barcode tickets. Now we're also working with TfL, and it's a DFT funded project of over £20 million to upgrade and install barcode readers on 40 of the TfL managed stations where there's interface with our rail services. So again, that's all the things that can help connectivity and ease of travel with individuals who are crossing against over multiple different operators and different transport modes.
That's right, because the travelling public, they don't necessarily think about operators or anything. It's just a train from A to B and then a bus and then I'm there. Exactly. Are there any future changes in services? Because just looking at our briefing, I mean, if I start with you, Angie, with GTR, we had seen some of your services halve from 4 trains per hour to 2 trains per hour. And you've talked about the change in your fleet, which I'm very aware of because we've discussed that before. But are there plans, concrete plans to look at extending some of the trains, increasing frequency? When might we expect to hear more on that?
So we've already made some changes in the May timetable change. So we have 2 opportunities a year to amend the timetable. That's May and December. So again, our timetable is very much demand-led at the moment, as we've already spoken about. So we're able to drill down into every single train on every single journey to see how many passengers we are carrying. So at the moment, it's very tactical interventions that we are making on lines of routes where we're identifying that the train is getting busy. So in the first instance, what we'll look at is to put on more coaches on the train, if that's possible, through rolling stock and also through the length of the platforms. The second thing that we'll do that then is, can we add more services back in? So in May, we did increase the capacity on the Gypsy Hill line. We also, so that's Gypsy Hill via Dulwich, and we're also looking for some other changes to Metro North, again around the Moorgate area. Now, in terms of investment, there's a couple of things that are happening. I think Cllr already touched on re-signalling to Victoria. That's a major project that's been going on for the last 3 or 4 years. That gives us better reliability. We've got the upgrade on the Moorgate lines and the Northern City line, and we're doing testing. In fact, we've been doing testing the last couple of nights on the integrated track signalling systems and the way that those operate. Because again, part of this is about how do you get more capacity into the infrastructure that you've already got. So there's one thing about, do you have enough rolling stock? Is the infrastructure capable? So in a short answer to your question is, yes, we're making tactical interventions where we can see that there are services that require more capacity.
And just to tidy that up, in terms of where you've increased capacity by putting an additional carriage on a train, that's taken away from somewhere else. It's not an additional carriage coming into your
At the moment,
fleet.
we've been able to do that with some clever optimisation and of our fleet, and my engineering director is not thanking me for that. But anything we do beyond this now would mean that we would have to look at where we use stock from another area.
That's what I was wondering. Okay, thank you. Cllr, can I come to you next?
Yep. So for us, the big ticket item is new fleet. So many people will be aware that we are about to introduce a new fleet of 701, which is Arterio, we're calling them trains, which are 10 carriages long, walk through, air conditioned, very modern, and they're going to be fantastic. Now, they are going to massively improve performance, customer experience, and also capacity, because the challenge we have today, which you've already noted, is because these trains are now 4 years late, loads of reasons why, we are having to see some of our other fleet go off lease, and we work closely with our colleagues in Southeastern, where our 707 beautiful trains are just about to depart and join Steve's network. We are going to see shorter trains, and we have been seeing that over the last few periods, because the older trains we've got that are over 40 years old, who should have been in train heaven by now, are still being used on our railways. So when those trains come into service, that will immediately satisfy the need we have for the capacity, because in terms of frequency, we're not getting much customer feedback about frequency. It's about the capacity piece. They're used to the timetables that we've now brought in, but we are seeing some overcrowding. There's about 10 services in the morning that come into Waterloo that are beyond full and standing. We cope okay with the others, but we really need those trains in service. So at the moment, the position we're at is we've already purchased half of the fleet. We've done some training with our drivers on the depot, and we're now doing some more software changes and preparing for mainline driver training. When that starts, you'll then see these services enter the suburban network, so it properly will deal with the issue we have, and the older fleet will either be cascaded off elsewhere or go back off lease. So that is going to transform. That is late. If that had come in at the time it should have done prior to COVID, we wouldn't see the challenges we've got today. But I do think that new fleet and investment in what the customer's asking for, which is, you know, proper accessibility, proper modern technology, being able to charge their phones with air conditioning on a train. I mean, this week is a typical week where it's very challenging, where you don't have modern fleet on the network. So we're really looking forward to that. So we don't have a date for that yet.
That's my next question. When is that coming in?
We're hoping by the end of the year to see them out on the actual mainline network. It has been a difficult challenge. There have been various software problems with these trains that other operators that are using them have had, but we're in a much better place now.
And Steve, finally, anything to add on that?
Yeah, from a timetable perspective, in May we added 179 trains a week. The principal beneficiaries there were the Bexley Heath line and the Sidcup line. As we move to December, there'll be 3 changes. We've got a dozen more what we call City Beam trains that have come over from Cllr, one careful owner, but each of those trains has significantly more capacity than the trains that they replace. So our timetable has forensically identified which busy morning or evening peak trains need to be served with the modern rolling stock as opposed to the existing networkers. So that will change. We've also put a small number of additional trains in the evening peak. There are a lot of people today choosing to come to work in the office, principally on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, but buy an off-peak ticket. So we need to add in capacity forensically into the evening peak. And the other thing we've done, we're operating currently an hourly service for much of the day on our high speed between the likes of Faversham and Gravesend and St Pancras, and much of that will switch to half-hourly from December. So we've identified either business case opportunities or capacity requirements, and I think Angie summarised it really well. On those busiest trains, if we can, the first thing we do is make the trains longer with the existing fleet that we have. Or the second thing we do is we put a more high-capacity train in place of the existing train on that same service. But then the third thing we do, if necessary, is run an additional service. So this is all very forensic. And at the moment, we are managing to a budget. But we can see a world when there's no more industrial action and we can plug our profit and loss account back together again. So we're looking at the revenue of the railway and also the cost of operating it, and then that will make the business case for investment far easier than it is today. And that, you know, that world isn't too far away.
Lovely. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Chair.
Right, I'm going to call in Assembly Member Baker for a quick question, and then that'll be Assembly Member Sheikh.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to thanks for all your very comprehensive answers on the services. I just wanted to sort of address the elephant in the room a little bit, which is obviously you're all in the business of running trains. That's what you do. You want to get people to where they need to be, and presumably you want to get more people where they need to be. But you are really totally constrained by the government's belief that we can save 1.5 billion off the railways, and that's having an impact on jobs, that's having an impact on services, that's causing industrial action, and you know your hands are tied really if you have to go cap in hand to the government to DfT to make a case for every single timetable change. It must be absolutely infuriating, to be honest, but you don't express that at all here, and I'm just wondering whether you feel what you can say is constrained at all, considering that the government gives out, the DfT gives out your contracts.
No, I don't feel constrained at all. to be honest with you. I think, we've always had to go to the DfT and consult with the DfT over timetables that what we operate as part of our train service specification and as part of the parameters that we operate in. So that's really no different to where we've been before on timetables.
The 1.5 billion reduction is a difference, though,
well,
isn't it? So does that not put different parameters on those discussions?
I think what we're seeing now is we're operating in a completely different environment than we are pre-COVID. We're moving much more towards a demand-led operation now, and I think many businesses have changed their operation and their model during COVID to reflect that, and I think that's what we are doing as well. We're not seeing the level of people commuting 5 days a week as we saw pre-COVID. We are seeing people commute on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and that pattern is absolutely set now. I can't see that changing again. So, I think COVID has probably kick-started us into looking at our operation. Sometimes you need something that really makes you look at your operation. And again,
so you think COVID has led to the reduction of use, basically a reduction of public transport in the makeup of how we travel around overall, because that's really what you're driving?
I think what we're seeing here is that COVID, people established working from home in a way that they never thought was going to be possible before. And I think that was absolutely triggered by COVID. There was a necessity for people to do things differently. And what we're seeing now, 2 years after COVID, we're not seeing that balance change. What we are seeing is we are seeing leisure bouncing back. So the weekend services bounce back much quicker than the weekday services. But then we less people travel. We can see the airlines are coming back more now. So for us, we have 2 airports on our network. So, my question
I just want to cut in because we're going to ask ask more about how we get more people on the route. I wanted to specifically understand how your relationships and how you operated as train operators, because you get into it presumably to run trains and get people about, not to just balance budgets, especially when budgets are constrained. And we're just about to ask about how we do get more people travelling, because it's really, really important.
Okay, I'll hand over to my colleagues then.
Thanks, Angie. Thank you. So from my perspective, I think that we need to now be more customer-led, which is what Angie's saying around the patterns. So the challenge we have, we work really well with Network Rail, but obviously things like engineering works, maintenance needs to happen. It happens at night, it happens at weekends, and you see our customers who want to use the railway at weekends being put off by rail replacement buses. The reliability of those is really not good at the moment because of an issue with attracting drivers. So we've got to look at how we can make the railway more attractive to people and more reliable, so we bring our customers back. We want more people travelling, we do, but at the moment we can't get them to spread themselves out, so it's a nice even pattern because people have established new working patterns. So
sorry, I'm just going to say we are just about to ask about how we drive up demand, so I'm trying not to cut across my assembly members, but so it's specifically about the new context about how strongly the railways are controlled by budget and by direct control by DfT.
So, frankly, if it wasn't for the government coming in and picking us up out of COVID, we wouldn't be here today. So absolutely, we've got a challenge on our hands to ensure that we find a more efficient way of running the railway. And I think that as much as it's difficult, and we, as Angie said, we always used to deal with the DfT regularly on many issues, we need to think really deeply and carefully about how we are not maybe as modern as we need to be as an industry. And I think it does give us an opportunity to look at the practices that we've got and think about how we can do things more flexibly. So the challenge is put to us to find a way. We're trying to work together as an industry through the Rail Delivery Group in the centre to find ways to be more efficient and then give us the opportunity to get back on the front foot and build again. So that's how I see it. That's my challenge. I love what I do. I can see the opportunities coming out of it. It's a tricky time because we've got industrial action. Once again, that isn't directly in R3's control in terms of fixing that problem, but I do think that we need to come to a position where we have a sustainable railway future, which means we've all got to think slightly differently. So that's where I'm at. If Steve wanted to say anything.
Yes, just to build on that, what we've done is we've set ourselves an agenda to build a better, more reliable and sustainable railway. And all of those three are important.
And when you say sustainable, you mean financially within the bounds that the government has set, not not environmentally sustainable, just to say, because we can use that word in different ways. So it's not criticism, it's clarification.
Sustainable in the long term, both environmentally and financially. So if I give you an example, we are now a public sector organisation. We have no private sector shareholders. We receive government funding as a public body. Our current subsidy is £1 million a day. £1 million a day to run Southeastern. Pre-COVID, that figure would have been between 50 and 60 million. So these things aren't exclusive. If we can identify ways of running a more efficient railway, because some of Southwestern's rolling stock will be redeployed on Southeastern, and it will be targeted to the very specific services that will benefit from that additional capacity. That is a good thing to do. So we need to make our railways more efficient. And
can I clarify, do you mean cheaper when you say more efficient?
Yeah, absolutely. Cheaper for the amount of services that we can provide. So we want to take waste out, we want to run our service at a lower cost, and we want to offer value for money for our customers.
Okay, understood.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Sheikh.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I feel like between Assemblymember Pigeon and Assemblymember Baker, this section is sort of, the context has been laid out, and I think particularly Assemblymember Baker, it's been quite helpful to talk about the elephant in the room, because I found it quite odd hearing the kind of narrative of demand-led operation and customer-led operation. For me, it's a little bit chicken and egg. If you aren't providing the services, if there isn't a frequency of train timetabling, then people are going to feel less inclined to travel to work. I think 2 years post the pandemic is actually not a significant enough amount of time, given how dramatic the changes were to our lifestyle during it, to assess what permanent changes are going to be. So I don't agree with TWT being a fixed pattern, and I actually think that there needs to be a longer, deeper and further assessment of how we get ridership back to pre-pandemic levels. And I certainly think reducing the number of services is deeply disincentivizing for those who do want to begin to travel into work. So I would really like to lay that out as anecdotally my experience as a Londoner more generally, with friends and family, but also as a councillor in Lewisham, speaking to residents on a very one-to-one personal level. And I know I'll come to you in a minute, Steve, in terms of Southeastern's services there. But so to come to the question, I guess there's an assumption in the question I have before me, which is what you are doing to increase ridership in Outer London, specifically to pre-pandemic levels. I guess the first question is, do you believe it's possible? And then if so, what exactly are you doing to enable it? And I'm not sure who wants to go first, or I can start with yourself, Angie. And let's go with Claire. We're switching up the order, Claire. Are you ready?
Thank you, Angie. I'm fine with that, yeah.
Go for it, Claire.
So we actually ran a commuter campaign last year to try and encourage people back into the workplace. Now, the purpose and the kind of thing, the sense behind that campaign was more around the social integration and relationships with your colleagues and your friends at work than it was about the actual workplace. Because having done research, many businesses now are led by employees saying, I want to work from home 2 or 3 days a week. That's my demand. If you want me, that's what you're going to get. And they are actually adjusting more to that way. So we're seeing businesses selling up their London offices, people working from home more. So we've got a big problem here. But what we're trying to do is encourage people to do that extra day, maybe, where they come into London. Maybe it's that Thursday evening where they go for a drink after work, to try and get them back into the habit that you do better business if you are with your colleagues. So that campaign did have a good impact in terms of bringing back up to the level we're at now. But we have been pretty much stable for 6 or 7 periods now. And looking ahead, the forecast for the autumn, I mean, next week is key. Back to school, back to work, let's see what happens there. We don't believe we're going to see much uplift in terms of the commuter market coming back to the railway. So we're doing our piece in terms of what we can do to promote and market. We're working with a department where we see that demand come back. I mentioned the Epsom line. It happens to be a line that's come back quicker than other routes, and we can really see the demand there. So we've put in additional services to pick up that demand, but that is the only route where we have that challenge so far. So you're right in saying that is a bit chicken and egg. nutmeg. But that's where we're at. We can't put on a route and people will come and use it anymore. That's not the position we're in. So we really do need to, as I said before, work closely with Network Rail, with our trade unions.
Just to make it a bit dynamic, because you said that is no longer where you're at, where you bot on a service and then people come and they use it, and that's what encourages ridership. But would you say that that's an effective or an even more effective way of actually ascertaining how you increase demand?
I think until we can really, so we're bringing back together, as Steve says, the cost and the revenue line. So we're going to start to put forward cases to the department for additional services and ways we can do things differently. If we can do that and see ridership return, it will absolutely enable us to go back to doing that. But we're not in that position. We simply are not. And we have to get through this industrial relations challenge at the moment. We really do need to modernise the way we run our businesses, and that has to come first to afford for us to do those things.
No,
so I do believe that's the right way.
That's really helpful. I'll come on to the industrial action point in a moment, because it's been mentioned by yourself and colleagues a few times. You said that you will be putting that case forward and you'll be working with partners to do that. So how is it that you'll be doing that if it needs to be demand-led and we found that that's maybe a flawed way of assessing demand?
So once again, we've also got, we have services where we can see that we could potentially have a good business case to increase. But at the moment, they're on the periphery of a good business case. So we need to look across, working with our partners in Network Rail and other operators, to make the ongoing running costs more efficient. So, for example, maintaining a station, currently the operator maintains it up to a canopy level. Network Rail do the maintenance above that. Why do we do two sets of work when we could just do it in one? So we're looking at ways now to be more efficient in the current way of working. If we can prove that saves money, we wish to then put forward bids to bring in new services, as the Secretary of State suggested would be the right thing to do in the future. We're starting to build those cases, but we need to prove we can be more efficient before we go there. So it really does call on all industry partners to come together. Steve mentioned the trains. We cascade trains to each other to make the best use of that rolling stock. So trains are not sat in a field doing nothing. That's how we run the railway, but we've got to do more of that.
No, thank you, Cllr. And Steve, I'll bring you in now, because I do want to reiterate my concern about the way that you have to present the case through efficiency savings and cost savings, when actually you could argue that perhaps the best way to make the service more efficient is by running more services and increasing usages, because it encourages people to come and use the train. So Steve, I just wondered if you'd speak to that point.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to. So, for example, I've said in December we're going to increase our services from Gravesend and Faversham into St Pancras. In some respect, that was an easier business case to make, because we're going from an hourly service to a half-hourly service, which is a very dramatic increase for people. And we've been able to do so in a very efficient way without increasing the cost of either the maintenance or the crew that are providing that service. So the candid answer to your question is yes, we are making business cases, but we're doing them forensically in places where we think they will have greatest value, and we're doing them by keeping the cost at their lowest. If I'm honest, at the moment, it would be difficult to make an argument to go from 4 trains an hour to 5 trains an hour on a metro service if that metro service was subject to regular industrial action and was only operating at, say, 70% of the pre-COVID level. Our average yield on a metro service is less than £5 per journey. So to justify the additional cost of services, we need a high degree of confidence that we will generate extra revenue. But as I say, I expect the pendulum to shift over time from maintaining the cost of the railway to driving down the subsidy of the railway. And there are positive examples, such as our new services from Faversham in December, which shows that it is possible to make this case.
Yeah, thank you for that, Steve. I mean, like I said, I'm also a councillor in Lewisham, and for what we hear sort of in waves, actually, of resident feedback is the reliability and the trust is less to do with a feeling of uncertainty around strike action, which actually you're often notified well in advance of, and people can relate to the need to want to improve their working conditions and services more broadly. And I think there's actually a lot of appreciation from residents that I understand of people standing up in that regard. What actually Lewisham residents have found, in particular with Southeastern Railway, because you did refer to that borough in one of your answers, is that the lack of consultation before timetabling, and then the effects that has on people wanting to go back to work, as well as certain routes being cut. And I know that you had the 3 Lewisham MPs write to you actually about that, and you've been called over to the borough a few times, but that actually is what chips away at trust and people feeling like they can have reliable services. So I'd really emphasise that actually I think you might have misplaced your analysis on what people use as a foundation for feeling trust in their public services.
Can I just say I've apologised publicly for not consulting on the December 22 timetable change. It was a change that was originally planned to take place in December 23. It was accelerated to save money, and it was done so without consultation. And we've said publicly, and the Rail Minister has said the same, that we will never do that again. If we're going to make any significant changes to our timetable, we will consult on them. What I can say is because of the changes that were made in May, and because of the regular meetings we've had with Lewisham and Greenwich councils, and because of the customer satisfaction that we measure every single period, and because of the survey that London Travel Watch has done, the confidence of our Metro customers is increasing, so is their satisfaction. And to mirror the points that Cllr and Angie made, our railway, our Metro railway, is now very punctual. In the off-peak, we can often achieve higher than 80% on time, which is stopping at every station within 59 seconds. Our cancellations so far this period are 1% of all the trains we've tried to run for all of the reasons, the trespasser, the failed train. And we're also, for the residents of Lewisham elsewhere, have commenced a procurement process which we invited feedback on to replace our 31-year-old network of trains with the kind of modern equivalents that my colleagues have got. So we are aiming to build this better railway, and residents of Lewisham and elsewhere should be very confident that as we grow or as we seek to amend our timetable, we will consult on those options.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate you reiterating the apology, and I think to quote yourself, it was accelerated to save money. So I think that should be a caution tale, I would hope, for the panel to take away about that being a flawed lens through which we look to improve the services around our rail going forward. I want to move on to Geoff to ask something, but I just want to check in with Angie if you were ready to contribute to this particular part of the conversation.
You ready now? I am ready.
Well done. Let's go.
Well, I thought we'd just share it around a little bit.
I know, you can't always go first.
You know, I think, you know, I'm very customer focused, and I think the last time I came to this committee, I actually said, you know, I think I was more excited than I've ever been in rail in the last 25 years, because, you know, we really do have to recognise that the customer is king here, and we have to work hard to bring our customers back. And that's something maybe that the railway has not done so much of, especially on those big talks like our talk and Southeastern and Southwestern. Sorry, I'm not saying that you're not customer focused, Cllr, but where there's been a high reliability on the commuter base and the airport, and we lost that market almost overnight. So we're having to work really hard now, as any other industry would. So I think that gives opportunity. You know, we obviously need to, there's 3 areas with customers. There's your existing customers who are travelling and get them to travel more. That's your easiest option with customers who grow in your market. So at the moment, whilst we are seeing passenger numbers very much on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we are still running the same train service on a Monday and Friday. So what we are doing is campaigns to attract people to travel on a Monday and a Friday with discounted rates. So again, it's how do you make the most of that capacity that you've got at the moment? How do you move that capacity around? The next market you then look at is your lapsed customers, and looking at your customers and why they've lapsed and bringing those back to the market and bringing in campaigns for those. And finally, your other market then is looking at your new customers that you now want to bring into the railway that hadn't considered the railway before. And this goes back to, you know, looking at those people who want to, and I think as Cllr said, it's, you know, getting people to fall back in love with commuting and understanding the value that commuting can have and their time. So there's really those 3 customer groups that you need to look at, and it is a bit chicken and egg, because you do need to start demonstrating that the growth is coming back to be able then to demonstrate we've got the demand to then deliver, and we need more capacity. if that answers your question.
It does, and if you could just take chicken and egg as a phrase back to the government when you're explaining to them why the way that they're asking you to assess demand is flawed, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to finish off with the final question. Geoff, I'm going to bring you in for this. It was just a question around the London Assembly has previously been in favour of the principle of further rail devolution to London. And I wanted to ask what impact you think this might have on outer London residents if train services were managed by TfL?
Previously with devolutions of West Anglia and indeed the original overground back in 2007, the case we've made has been one where we feel that we've been able to add value to the railway in the following ways. Firstly, we can get reliability up. Some of those railways back in the particular times thinking of were most unreliable. We could choose to invest in it, in the stations and in the trains, which empirically we've subsequently done. We think we've got a better business model for the types of inner suburban railway passengers and railway services that they offer, in terms of the way we do business with a concession type of contract as opposed to a franchise, as franchises were in those particular times. And that enables us to get a better customer experience in multiple different ways, and indeed to bear down on things like fares evasion. So they were the kind of things that we made the case for back then.
Thank you, Geoff. I'm going to pass back over to the chair because I've been... Thank you.
That
worked. You banged.
Oh, there we go. An old trick. Yeah, so thank you for that. I'm going to call on Assembly Member Baker, but we do only have 20 minutes, so if you want to shuffle up your questions, I don't mind, but I do know that some of our colleagues who are guests need to leave by 1. Okay? Thank you very much.
Absolutely. We always finish on time, even if we crash into the end of the questions. Yes, so I've got some questions now about the one-day travel card. And this does always happen when we've got multiple guests that obviously you all want to answer, but if we could all answer quicker, that would be much, much appreciated. Not that your contributions haven't been fantastic so far. So to the representative of the train operators, what impact will the removal of the one-day travel card tickets have on people using rail services in outer London, do you feel? Go for it, Claire.
Hi. So obviously we're disappointed of the withdrawal of the travel card, but it's going to impact people coming from outside of London in, because obviously the TfL zones cover the majority of our metro network anyway. So, I mean, I understand the Mayor has to make difficult decisions, as we do, so we're all in a very similar position. So we want to work with the other train operating companies, Rail Delivery Group, and see if there's another way that we can keep this going. But obviously it would need to work with TfL and all of us to find a sustainable way for TfL going forward. So I think because we also have Tap to Go and we've got other methods of contactless card, it is that outer London coming in where the biggest impact will be.
That's fine. I suppose, Angie and Steve, can I ask you whether you have anything to add or disagree, or whether you think Claire's... Steve.
Yeah, I would add we are all trying to grow our railway, so we are starting a marketing campaign next week called Back to Work. We do want our railway to grow. In the summer, getting people to Kent's Coast is a very easy thing to do, asking Londoners to go that way. Getting people outside London to come into central London is more difficult, and therefore the removal of the one-day travel card is potentially bad news for the recovery of traffic. It will cost our revenue about £6 million a year. It'll make it more expensive for people, particularly with travel cards, to travel from outer London into London, and it will depress the recovery of one of our slowest recovering areas. Now, we understand that the decision is made because of fiscal constraints. That's been pretty much the tone of the conversation today, but we are disappointed that this particular product will not be available.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Geoff, coming to you. The current agreement leaves TfL, I understand the figures, 40 million under underfunded per year. And I understand the Deputy Mayor for Transport has written to the Minister of State for Rail to try and convene a joint meeting, because obviously it seems like people want a solution. Do you know if there's been any progress or a meeting is planned yet?
I haven't heard that there's a meeting planned, but as Deputy Mayor and others have said, this is a reversible decision if we find a solution. It is something we're obliged to do as part of the funding agreement, money that you mentioned, and we're bound to find between £500 million and £1 billion of additional income. And it's one of various changes to ticket validities. But yes, it is reversible, and we would seek to find a solution if we can. I don't know of any more recent meetings.
That's helpful, though. Thank you. It's a helpful update, or lack of update in this case. Just to dig into a little bit the specifics of the impact, Geoff, do you know what the proportion of children in London who currently have a child zip card, an Oyster zip card? Because obviously it may well be the ones that would be the ones that don't that would potentially be most impacted here.
Well, I think in London it shouldn't be a real problem. It's out boundary. That's where they're less likely to have a child zip card. You can apply for a child zip card, or you can get a young visitor's
but do you know how many children in London don't have them?
I haven't got it.
Yeah. No. Are you sure it's not? You sure it's not in the folder? No.
It might take me a little while to read through it.
If you could come back on that, that would be because yes, obviously the assumption is it will be children outside London, but there may well be children within London who might use that and don't have their zip card.
I'll find out.
Yeah, because the consultation document said that the TfL don't capture the data on the demographics of those who purchase the day travel cards, and I don't think the operators have that information either. Is there any reason why that information isn't gathered? Because it does make it, well, pretty much impossible to make a really accurate assessment of who's going to be most impacted by the withdrawal, which is obviously a really important part of considering that.
Well, the equality impact assessment is reasonably detailed, but the problem with data is that you don't know what you don't know. Now, that's not a very helpful answer, I recognise, but the author of it did I think it's his best to delve into precisely what who the losers were from this and what the distribution was. But,
understood. But without that data,
and find out more.
Yeah, that would be great, and do appreciate that the best was done. But without that data, and particularly as we're quite used to TfL having lots and lots of data, it's a real shame in this case we don't. Just to the operators, do you have anything to add on that? Why you don't have that information?
No, I just don't have it, so I'm sorry. I'm back in the same boat. I need to explore, but I don't believe so. I mean, we just know, obviously, that we've got quite a few stations within the TfL fare zone which won't be impacted, but it's the outer London visitors that will be.
Yeah.
The only data I've got is a headline data that approximately half of the users of a travel card will have a rail card of some description. So that is a young person's card, it is children, etc. But it doesn't specifically cover the child aspect.
So that's data from ticket purchases, presumably, that you can just literally work out what price they paid.
Exactly.
Okay. Understood. Thank you. I think any more information on that, even though if it's why you don't have the information, would be really helpful. And just finally on this, to all of you, what proposals are there for greater integration of ticketless and contactless journeys across the London boundary? I think some of you have touched upon some of this already because it's about driving demand, but anything else you have to add?
I think I touched on it with the barcode readers around the 40 stations that I mentioned earlier on. So I think just to reiterate that under that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 6 more stations out to Sevenoaks will be included, what we call Project Oval. So it's tap in, tap out, pay-as-you-go technology that will go live in December, and that will bring the total number of tap-in, tap-out stations on our network to 71. So it's a good step forward. And then there are plans for a phase beyond that, but the next phase goes live in December.
I think those 6 are part of 53 across the wider southeast. So not just southeastern, but other parts of the railway network and the immediate home counties.
We've got 12 coming in December. So there we go. There's the example. We also have tap to go across our network.
That's just showing off, isn't it? It's got twice as many.
We also have quite high smart ticketing use on South West Links. We've got tap to go product, which is capped weekly season ticket prices. So that's really very popular. So we're already quite, far forward in that regard.
The last point I would add is, because I tell everybody who may or may not want to know this, we now have barcode ticketing across the entire southeastern estate for the very first time. So you can make a journey from anywhere to anywhere on our network. You can go from Lewisham to Margate with a barcode ticket as of now. That technology, we were virtually selling no tickets at all at Christmas time, and it's now 10% of our daily traffic, and it's grown and grow exponentially as we promote its benefit for those who choose to use it.
Thank you. That's great. Okay. Okay. So the final questions. The final question is around ticket offices, as you can imagine. So the committee heard in our last meeting, it was 2 parts, in its last meeting, the potential impact of removing staff from ticket offices, particularly on disabled people. The committee have written to London Travel Watch expressing its concerns. How do you intend to respond to that feedback when you get it? I suspect you have some idea of the scale. Well, we know the scale of literal responses. I think you've got a sense of what people are feeling, and what do you expect the timetable for decisions to be made is?
Okay, so we started engaging under an NDA with accessibility groups at the back end of last year, and we have been discussing proposals as soon as the consultation started in a more sort of open way with our accessibility groups. So we've already got quite a lot of feedback. Now, because the consultation is now closed and we've got until the 31st of October for the passenger bodies to come back to us, we've got a meeting scheduled actually tomorrow with them to get that initial feedback. I think from my perspective, we clearly do need to look at the trend in terms of modern retailing. I think that's absolutely right, and I've already said that on Southwestern we've got 75% of tickets bought through smart media. But the proposals that we put forward were based on data crunching, because we weren't in a position to be able to engage widely with our people or our customers until the formal consultation started. So the consultation is so important, and I'm really pleased that there have been over 600,000 responses to it, because it gives us rich data to be able to look at those proposals again. So I would imagine that we'll spend the next few weeks sitting down with the passenger bodies going through that detail. There'll be some themes that will come through that feedback. The industry has some underpinning principles around the changes, that accessible needs will be met, that customers won't have to go out of their way. So we need to have a proposal that delivers to those pledges, which means that undoubtedly there will be changes to the initial proposals that have been put forward. So for me, the consultation period is the rich moment where we get this right, and then beyond the date at the end of October, there will then be time for us to refine our proposals. We need to go to the Secretary of State if there's any sort of debate around that, and obviously it's going to be sort of well into, I would have thought, the early part of next year before we'll be moving forward, but no firm dates. We don't have it for all of those steps.
Very similar to Cllr, because it's the same process, obviously working with London Travel Watch and Transport Focus. I think we had about 20,000 responses in for GTR. We're getting those in themes. We are trying to talk to Transport Focus and London Travel Watch before they do their final analysis of every station and give us the feedback, which is due at the 31st of October. And again, as Cllr has said, you know, this is about meaningful consultation here. So it is, let's get the themes ahead of the final consultation so we can start looking at our plans. I think one of the things that we've all committed to as well is ensuring that any station that had staff today would still have staff going forward. And that is something we're absolutely committed to. And also we have an accessibility panel who we work with, who we've been closely working with over these changes, and we've done quality impacts assessments for every single station. So, you know, we recognise it's a big change and we have to absolutely get it right. And that's the point of the consultation.
Thank you. If I can just add to that from a Southeastern perspective. We said very publicly a statement, which is quite a bold statement. We said we want to build a better, safer and more accessible railway. A better, safer and more accessible railway at a lower cost to the taxpayer. Now, is that possible? We think it is, because it's many, many years since the staffing model on our stations was reviewed and we had the right people in the right place able to give the right support to our customers. And we think there are two things we need to do, and they can coexist quite happily. One is we make it far easier for people to self-serve who want to. So we've just discussed the extension of pay-as-you-go. We know that barcode ticketing is now a reality. But at the same time, that frees up our people and our capacity to help those who need assistance. And like Cllr and Angie, we're talking to our accessibility panel about the specifics of what would need to be true for a world with fewer ticket officers to be acceptable to a visually impaired person, a wheelchair user, or someone with autism. So we're working through the details of this. It's more important to get it right than to do it quickly. And that's one of the reasons why Southeastern has currently only consulted on 40 ticket officers, and they are ticket officers that each sell less than 50 tickets a day, because people are walking past the ticket office with their pay-as-you-go technology. And actually our people are ready and waiting to come out and give more help to more customers in more ways every day. If we give them the right training, we give them a radio, we give them body-worn video, and we give them a mobile phone, they will be able to do so much more when not in the ticket office. And some of our colleagues are doing that anyway, in an unofficial, informal way, and we're just seeking to create a way that that can be something we do consistently, much more consistently for our customers.
Okay, thanks for that. I will not rehearse the many, many responses that, well, 600,000 of them, of which I think the the vast majority of them would probably disagree with quite a lot of the statements you've made there, Steve, about, and even whether it was possible to do all the things you expect. But I'm certainly not going to do that. Those will all come out over the next couple of months. What I do just want to clarify is that obviously I think there's been acknowledgement, which is welcome, that the proposals will change. Obviously there's minimal change to huge change, and I'm not going to make any assumption on where that will be. That will also come through the consultation. But I mean, I certainly get the impression that savings have already been made. I mean, Southeastern, I understand for the last 5 periods in the Greater London area, your ticket offices were only open for about 73% of the time they should have been open. So it sounds like those cuts are already being made. How possible is it for you? Say the government said, actually, keep them all open. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it might do. Could you do that? Or have you already made those cuts? How far could you go?
So it wouldn't surprise you that we've been talking to the industry and to the trade unions about this since COVID, how to effectively run our railway more efficiently. So in all conscience, for the last year or more, we have not been recruiting people to fill ticket office vacancies other than general purpose relief, where you might, cover a roster and do a few places. If a local station lost a ticket office person, we've not recruited the replacement of that person whilst simultaneously consulting the removal of that position. So we have vacancies on our network today.
So clarify, you're consulting on the removal of the posts? before you've done the public consultation on the removal of ticket officers?
No, we have.
No, you're not.
So we've
So you
we've
have
been
made an
talking,
assumption
we've
about
been
ticket officers being
we've been
removed.
talking to the trade unions
Yeah.
in a very public way around the future of the railway and what savings might be possible, and in doing so, we have paused the recruitment of some of our vacancies whilst we are working towards that end. Now, what we do with every other
just going to say, I'm really up against it now.
Okay.
So that was supposed to be a relatively short question.
So when the consultation is concluded, whatever outcome is agreed, those ticket officers which are agreed to be to remain open, they will be fully staffed, and those changes that we propose elsewhere, if agreed, will go forward. So we'll end up with a robust staffing model with the right number of customers at every station every day. That's how we run our trains, that's how we run our onboard crew, and that's where we want to get to with our station staff.
Clearly not, if it's 73% of the time it's only that you should have been open.
But we don't cancel any trains because we don't have a driver. So we roster the right number of drivers. Even when there's an ASLEF strike, we don't cancel any trains.
I'm sorry, I'm asking about ticket officers, not trains.
That's my point. What we need to do is move to the position where the staffing of our stations is done with the same precision and formality as the staffing of our train crew, and the consultation will give us the outcome of that, and we will resource exactly to the outcome that's agreed.
But you're already
through that
resourcing under what you've said you're doing.
We have
already
some,
resourcing under
we
that.
we have some vacancies today. Yes, we do.
Okay, that does seem like you've already made a judgment about what the outcome is.
No, we're just in a holding pattern until we know.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we're literally about to run out of time. Angie, Cllr, do you have anything to add to that? In 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds, we have informally been engaging with the trade union on change. They're really up for multi-skilling. They think it's the right thing to do for career pathways, but we haven't made any decisions. So there are vacancy gaps across the entire network for various reasons, and it would be inappropriate to recruit jobs whilst change is being discussed and the union accept that position. So at the moment there's no decisions made, but I do feel that the trade unions are really keen for us to move forward with multi-skilling and better career pathways.
I think we should probably avoid speaking on behalf of them if they're not here. Angie?
Ditto. To what Cllr has just said there, we have made no decision on what we're doing with the consultation is going on at the moment. I think it's very different when you have smaller stations and larger stations, where you have larger stations with multi-ticket windows like Victoria and Gatwick. In fact, Gatwick, we don't have a ticket office anymore. We've restructured the station. It's undergone a major development, and everybody is now out on the concourse doing exactly the same sort of customer host. So in the bigger ticket offices where we are seeing a decline in tickets being sold through the ticket office, we aren't actively backfilling any of those spaces. At other locations where we have smaller ticket offices, we're using general purpose reliefs to make sure that we cover staffing in those areas. My local station, unfortunately, one member of staff has moved. Fortunately, one member of staff has moved for promotion, and one is ill at the moment. But we are still opening that station, and we're using general purpose release. So we're maintaining the service level to our staff, to our customers. Sorry, that was longer than I expected.
Well, thank you very much for that. We've just about made it, actually, 1 minute past, but that's good enough. Guests, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge and help. And Geoff, great, played both halves. Well done. We didn't get. Last minute action there. We have got a couple of short things to sort out, but if you wish, you're welcome to leave. But once again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you. All right, moving on. Right, so having thanked, can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Noted. Can we also delegate authority to me as the chairman in consultation with the deputy chair and party group leads to agree any output arising from the meeting? Section 8, can we note the work programme? Noted. Section 9, date of next meeting. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 27th September 2023 at 10 a.m. in the committee rooms 2 and 3 City Hall. And finally, any other business I consider urgent, there isn't. So thank you very much. The meeting is now closed.
Thank you, Chair.